Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Jason Liu, head of the Global Infrastructure Facility. On behalf of the Global Infrastructure Facility, or GIF, I'm very pleased to welcome you all to the webinar, Investing in the Resilient Future for the Caribbean, the joint event organized in collaboration with the Global Affairs Canada, the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, as well as the host of a multilateral development bank partners, including the Caribbean Development Bank, IDB, IDB Invest, IFC, and the World Bank. The GIF is pleased to be an organizing partner for this event, given our focus on building pipelines of bankable, low-carbon, climate-resilient, and inclusive infrastructure programs and projects that maximize the mobilization of a private capital. While infrastructure deficits are staggering in many developing countries, such gaps are particularly significant in the Caribbean, where the impact of climate change have had a devastating impact on core infrastructure. The considerable infrastructure investment gap has only further widened as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, particularly for the region that relies heavily on tourism and the linkage to the global market. COVID-19 has brought such economic activities to a standstill. Therefore, building resilient infrastructure capable of withstanding pandemics and climate-related events will be crucial to supporting trade, tourism, and sustainable economic development in the region. The GIF shares in this vision. Established as a G20 initiative in 2014, the GIF provides the comprehensive design, appraisal, structuring, and transaction support needed to bring well-structured, bankable, and resilient infrastructure project to the market. As part of this mission, the GIF has also relied on generous support of Canada, serving as an anchored funder and active partner supporting the GIF's activities. Particularly as the GIF looks to expand its pipeline of projects in the Caribbean, we look forward to working closely with our counterparts at the Global Affairs Canada to identify such opportunities to support infrastructure PPP development in the region. I will now turn it over to Mark Ronald, President and CEO of the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, to provide his opening remarks. Mark, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Jason, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all, depending on where you are at this point in time. Thank you again, Jason, for the opening remarks, good scene-setting comments. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, our mandate is to collaborate with all levels of government, Indigenous communities, and the private sector to enable smart, sustainable, and innovative approaches to developing and maintaining public infrastructure that achieve the very best outcomes and enhance quality of life for Canadians. Now, while not a panacea, when done for the right reasons and on the right projects, Canada's experience has been that public-private partnerships have time and again actually achieved these very best outcomes and enhanced quality of life for Canadians. In fact, P3s have consistently outperformed traditional procurement in terms of on-time, on-budget delivery of high-quality infrastructure, and while achieving significant economic impact. In fact, over the years, Canadian governments have saved in excess of $27 billion through the use of public-private partnerships, and on average every year, P3s have contributed about $14 billion to Canada's GDP, creating around 115,000 jobs, and contributing $4 billion in tax revenues to both the federal and provincial governments across the country. So you can imagine why P3s have been attractive to political leaders across the Canadian spectrum. And most importantly, from my view, public-private partnerships have allowed governments to very effectively leverage private sector expertise, innovation, and financing. So it's easy to see that I believe that well-structured public-private partnerships can generate similarly strong results for Caribbean countries, and that's why CCPPP is so pleased to be part of today's webinar and to be partnering with this quite incredible group of organizations, including, of course, the Caribbean Development Bank, Global Affairs Canada, Global Infrastructure Facility, the Inter-American Development Bank and IDB Invest in particular, the IFC, and the World Bank. And that kind of collaboration, I think, has made a difference with respect to today's event. We're happy to support the webinar on our Crowdcast platform today. And like all of you, I am really looking forward to what promises to be a very informative and engaging program. I'm now delighted to turn the microphone over to our keynote speaker today, Michael Grant, who, as you know, is Assistant Deputy Minister for the Americas at Global Affairs Canada. Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Government of Canada, I'd like to welcome you to this important event, Investing in a Resilient Future for the Caribbean. Let me first give a special recognition to you, Mark, CEO of the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, and also to Jason, head of the Global Infrastructure Facility. We're very pleased to be hosting this webinar with both of you and your organizations. I'd also like to acknowledge the efforts of our moderator, regional PPP expert, Brian Samuel, in preparing for this event, as well as the engagement of our key partners, including the Caribbean Development Bank, the IDB, IDB Invest, IFC, the World Bank, Canadian Commercial Corporation, and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. And I note the presence today of OECS Director General Dr. Jules. Canada and the Caribbean have a deep history based on strong political, commercial, and especially people-to-people ties. And the Caribbean remains a key strategic partner for Canada in the hemisphere and in the world. Canada has long been a leading development partner in the region and continues to provide significant support to Caribbean countries. At the CARICOM intersessional meeting in February 2020, Canada announced $61 million in new commitments for resilience, technical assistance, and educational exchanges. And this builds on decades of support, including a $100 million post-hurricane pledge in 2017. We also continue to back vulnerable Caribbean small island developing states in the multilateral space, including the international financial institutions, and in response, especially in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Donors and governments cannot address the challenges facing the region or develop the potential opportunities on their own. In order to attain sustainable development goals, Caribbean countries will need to mobilize and collaborate effectively with the private sector. As Canada enhances its engagement in the Caribbean through inclusive and resilient economic growth, it seeks to do so with innovative approaches to leverage private sector expertise and investment. All of our work is aligned with Canada's feminist international assistance policy, which puts gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls at the center of our engagements abroad and encourages diverse mechanisms and partnerships. As the world moves to recover from COVID-19, this provides a unique opportunity to build back better and greener. In these unprecedented times, Canada aims to build on its close partnership with the Caribbean and to set in motion the kinds of innovative mechanisms and approaches that will help bolster private sector engagement and investment. Public-private partnership arrangements for infrastructure offer an ideal opportunity to reconcile development and resilience objectives with the fiscal constraints of Caribbean countries, but have limited success due to challenges in properly assessing PPP opportunities, structuring these for the private sector, and framing these within an effective enabling environment. Canada has become a leader and trusted partner in the use of PPP for infrastructure, and Canadian companies have developed a wealth of expertise in implementing PPP projects. There are also a growing number of Canadian firms and investors that are active or primed for the Caribbean market. Canada's clean tech offer, for example, is wide-ranging, including water, agriculture, green building, transport, smart and microgrids, renewable energy, and clean energy for mining and oil and gas. Canadian firms in this space are represented today. These firms have the experience to play a key role in the design, development, and operation of critical infrastructure to help Caribbean countries meet their ambitious objectives for green infrastructure, renewable energy, and sustainable blue economy. Canada also has expertise to assist Caribbean governments in shaping their regulatory environments for PPPs. Today's event will also bring awareness to PPP successes and challenges, both in Canada and in the Caribbean region. We hope that by zeroing in on these, we can highlight the key issues and help set the stage for better planned infrastructure investments and advance specific pipeline opportunities in the region. You will hear from many organizations today that can help you going forward. Key among these is the Canadian Council on Public-Private Partnerships, which has been an important facilitator in global PPP knowledge exchange. We are pleased they have agreed to partner with us and the Global Infrastructure Facility in what I believe is the first such forum of its kind for the Caribbean. Canada values its partnership as well with the Global Infrastructure Facility, which in 5 short years has already developed a strong track record of working with governments and development partners in the preparation of infrastructure projects across 47 countries. As you may know, Canada is a founding supporter of the GIF, and we are pleased to be making inroads with them into the Caribbean, beginning with this event today. We are hopeful that the GIF will also expand its partnerships in the region, including through its accreditation of the Caribbean Development Bank. Both the GIF and the CCPPP are helping to pave the way for PPPs across the globe, as are other critical development finance partners represented here today. Thank you for being here to play your respective parts in building a more resilient, inclusive, and prosperous Caribbean. I wish you a productive discussion, and now turn the floor to our moderator, Brian Samuel, to move into the first session of the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, Mark, and Jason. Well, good morning, everybody. And here we go. I see we have 516 people, and I'm really excited to be moderating this event. Before we dive in, I just wanted to give a little story, and it's called The Ballad of Mr Ppp. Once upon a time, in a village called Infrastructure, there lived a man called Peter Patrick Patterson, but everybody called him Mr Ppp. And I know every cricket fan of the West Indies is listening to that name. But the village was poor, and this was feudal England. And by the time the Sheriff of Nottingham had finished all his feasting and hunting, there wasn't much to share left among the vassals to give them roads. So there were no roads, there was no water, and every year farmers would lose their crops because their wagons would become bogged down in the mud and they couldn't bring them to Nottingham. So Mr Ppp had an idea. He borrowed some money and he built a road, and he charged the people a small fee to use it. He then built a well, and he charged people a small amount for the fresh water that they could get. Suddenly, farmers could get their crops to market, and children stopped getting sick from bad water. Most of the villagers thought Mr Ppp was a wonderful fellow who provided them with much needed services at a nominal cost. But there were others who said that water came from the sky and should be free. And who ever heard of paying to walk on a road? These people thought that Mr Ppp was a rogue who stole their money and exploited them. Poor Mr Ppp suffered a nervous breakdown and eventually had to leave. Fast forward 500 years, and what has changed? PPPs are still loved by some, reviled by others. There are many misconceptions about PPPs, many of them inaccurate. Many of the views that people have are completely wrong. This morning, we are going to put Mr. Ppp under the microscope and examine him from all sides, good, bad, and otherwise. We've gathered an impressive roster of speakers, and we're really pleased to have such a large audience to share with us this morning. So without further ado, let's dive into the first session, in which we look at PPP challenges and opportunities in the region, And we kind of look at what is the secret ingredients for success. And finally, whatever became of Mr. PPP? Well, he became so disillusioned with infrastructure that he embarked on a new career. He lived in Nottingham and he changed his name to Robin Hood, where he eventually did profit from the rich to subsidize the poor. Thank you very much. So off we go on our first session. Just a couple of housekeeping points. This is a crowdcast platform, which is being monitored by our invisible controller, Mr. Andrew Koolsbergen, who is handling all the pyrotechnics. You can speak to him if we have any issues and so on. During the sessions, don't forget to click on your ask a question. You could ask questions, please get them in. And you could also like other people's questions. The audience is automatically muted. Presenters, don't forget to mute when you're not speaking. And finally, I'll be moderating the webinar, and one of my jobs is to keep speakers on time. So if you hear the glass alarm, then you know what to do. So off we go into the session. Are we all ready? Okay. So the first speaker will be Nicola Russell. Nicola is the manager of the Development Bank of Jamaica's PPP program. And Nicola, over to you.
Thank you. Morning, Brian. Good day to everyone. On behalf of the Development Bank of Jamaica, I want to thank the organizers for inviting DBJ to attend this webinar on investing in a resilient future for the Caribbean. This webinar is timely as we seek to navigate our way through the impacts of the global COVID-19 pandemic, even while we strive to develop viable infrastructure investment projects to take to market. The government of Jamaica knows that reliable infrastructure is critical to the country's economic development, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic. As is the case with many other countries, Jamaica's fiscal resources are insufficient to deliver these services to the extent required. Therefore, private finance and expertise have an important part to play in the development of the country's resilient infrastructure. The government's public-private partnership and privatization program, for which the Development Bank of Jamaica is the chief implementing agency, is central to the government's growth agenda. The program monetizes assets and releases resources that the government can use to fund critical infrastructure and services, and at the same time creates investment opportunities for private capital. The role of the DBJ in the PPP and privatization program includes recommending policy to government, transaction management and secretariat support to government ministries, departments and agencies, identifying funding and capacity building for government to assist in the preparation and execution of PPP and privatization transactions. There's also a PPP unit in the Ministry of Finance that DBJ works closely with, and that unit focuses on reviewing PPPs for value for money and fiscal responsibility. DBJ has to date successfully completed 27 privatization and PPP transactions since 2009, and GOJ's PPP and privatization program has facilitated approximately US $1.7 billion in investments in the Jamaican economy. PPP transactions completed include the Norman Manley International Airport PPP and the Kingston Container Terminal PPP transactions. The government has also utilized the Jamaica Stock Exchange to achieve one of its objectives of broad-based ownership, as well as monetizing assets with the privatizations of Wigton Wind Farm in May 2019 and Trans-Jamaica Highway in March 2020. The government is also utilizing other privatization modalities, such as sale to strategic investors and development leases. The DBJ is currently working on several PPP projects, including the National Education Trust School Solar PPP project, which we recently received cabinet approval of the final negotiated terms with the preferred bidder, and we expect commercial close shortly. We'll be highlighting some of the other PPP investment opportunities in this webinar. Interestingly, in addition to PPPs, we're seeking to undertake a development lease for a section of the rail from Montego Bay to St. Elizabeth. We're also seeking to privatize via the stock exchange, the Jamaica Mortgage Bank, and the GOJ's shareholding in the Jamaica Public Service Company. So the GOJ's PPP and privatization program, facilitation of private participation in resilient infrastructure, will continue to be an important element of the country's economic recovery efforts over the next few years.
The management unit in the government of the Bahamas. Unfortunately, Anthony is having some technical challenges with his microphone. I don't know if we've got those resolved yet. Andrew?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay. Well, Mr. Cartwright has sent an email this morning. We had some discussion points and so on. So let me just read a couple of comments from Mr. Cartwright. The government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas adopted a PPP policy in 2018 and is currently developing or procuring a number of private investors through PPP schemes. The government has in place a PPP Steering Committee, which is comprised of permanent secretaries from the Ministry of Finance, Public Works, Office of the Prime Minister, Office of the Attorney General. And this proposals to the Steering Committee are assessed internally by the Ministry of Finance, and which includes looking at value for money and fiscal responsibility, transparency, probity, competitive procurement, environmental and social sustainability, before it is evaluated by the Steering Committee. One of the projects that is ongoing in Nassau at the moment, just at the time that the COVID pandemic hit, is a very ambitious project to develop Nassau Cruise Port in downtown Nassau, Bahamas. Of course, the cruise industry has been hugely hit in the last 12 months, and the future is uncertain. But notwithstanding, the developers are optimistic that in the post-COVID cruise environment, it is going to bounce back. And construction of the new port is well underway. So they are also putting, their money behind their optimism. Another issue, another comment that Mr. Cartwright would like to make regards the family islands and the infrastructure projects. Family islands, as you know, Nassau, the Bahamas, consists of 700 islands. I've been to 3 of them, 4 of them. And the family islands are each one of them is relatively small. So they want to put together some opportunities in the family islands and bundle them for solar power, renewable energy, and airport developments. So those are the comments from Mr. Anthony Cartwright at the moment. Next, we would move on to Dr. Didicus Jules. Dr. Jules is the director of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States based in St. Lucia. And Dr. Jules, over to you.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I really loved your parable, Mr. Samuel, on PPEs. I think it adequately sums up, and my colleague from Jamaica spoke eloquently of the efforts of in Jamaica to engage PPEs. By way of preface, let me say that the pandemic, while it has been very deleterious in its impact on the region, has also provided us with a very unique opportunity to do the things that we were hesitant to do, that we know that we need to do over the last 20 years, and to get them done within 2 months of the pandemic. So we take this optimistic perspective on the opportunities that have been presented. Now, although the current situation is very focused on the pandemic itself and its economic consequences, I think it's important to emphasize that we are not dealing with a single threat, as dire as it may present, but what I've repeatedly described as the spare point of a concatenation of crises. climate change remains a major existential threat in its own right. And this is compounded by the pandemic, which in turn has been made worse by economic consequences. In the OECS, we've been very careful in our analysis of the situation, as well as in our formulation of our response to it, to identify and to seek to address both the multidimensionality as well as the concatenative characteristics of this historical crisis. And by multidimensionality, we're talking about looking at all critical dimensions of the current situation. At the OECS, we describe this as what we call the HEESS strategy, HEESS, standing for health, economic, education, social, and security. And in terms of the concatenative impact, we're looking at the impact of COVID in the HEESS areas that I mentioned, but added to that, climate change, plus our pre-existing structural vulnerabilities as SIDS, the erosion, plus the erosion of multilateralism, which in its own posture was already insensitive to the disadvantages of SIDS. So we see, while we've analyzed our problem using that HEESS paradigm, we also see this as not just a problem, but also as a framework for response to the problem and the challenges of resilience. So in each expression of our vulnerability, there are specific structural issues that need to be extrapolated beyond the immediate situation and highlighted as intrinsic vulnerabilities that require attentive engineering. So in conceptualizing and constructing the idea of resilient infrastructure, it is imperative that we start with a recognition that this challenge is not simply one of modernizing what is in many parts of the region aging infrastructure, just as it is in the United States, or refurbishment of the infrastructure, but will require in many cases a reconceptualization of what that infrastructure in itself represents. So in all cases, there is the need to redesign to meet new standards that speak to green and disaster-proofing codes. But in some cases, the abandonment of old models of provision of services provided by that infrastructure or the pivot to new technologies of provision are important. And if I just quickly run through the HEESS paradigm for us, the health sector provides an excellent example of what we are thinking conceptually, because resilience in the health sector requires a comprehensive reconceptualization. Think health ecosystems involving policy, physical and virtual infrastructure, involving new models of care, and incorporation of a supporting architecture to strengthen capability in all of the dimensions. So in policy, for example, how do we manage, regulate, manage incentives, set standards for the health ecosystem? And policy, not just for curative care, but preventative initiatives, especially in relation to NCDs. So things like healthy lifestyles, nutrition, now need to come within that basket of health policy. And then the challenge of sustainable financing, which brings into the microscope the articulation of public and private health insurance, things like cost-sharing principles. Are they going to be means-based? What is provided free and deemed essential rights, and what is paid for? Then rethinking the infrastructure requirements that are essential to, that takes into account special care requirements and what needs to be decentralized. So that would involve things like restructuring the provision of care, looking at, for example, the care at the home, care at within the community, and care at the national level. And he said critically what needs to be physical and what can be transitioned to virtual, because we know now there are technologies that allow for monitoring of patients, especially with critical health conditions, that can really be done remotely and remove the need for regular doctor visits in person. The ecosystem, therefore, can no longer just be conceived of as the public system, but must now embrace all providers, private providers as well, doctors, labs, private nursing providers, and so on. In the realm of the economy, we know that, well, here is the most obvious examples of the opportunities for private-public partnership. Transportation infrastructure. In the OECS, we've been working with the World Bank on the regional ferry, and we've been very clear in our discussions with the World Bank that this cannot be a recommendation for governments to create that ferry service. It has to be a private sector-driven thing with the supporting policies and incentives provided by governments. We cannot transpose a LIAT problem. I think it's maybe known to our listeners that we've had for over 50 years a publicly owned air transportation company called LIAT that really served the region admirably, but it's government owned and it has not been able to survive the challenges of the times. So we can't substitute one public service problem for another. There is also the question of utilities, including communications. Electricity, for example, has been very susceptible to disaster, so therefore the need for resilient infrastructure. The water infrastructure, another critical area ripe for private-public partnerships, and speaking directly to the parable that Mr. Samuel presented, the average age of water infrastructure in the OECS is over 40 years. And in several countries, we've had such a deterioration of the distribution infrastructure, even where there have been investments in the collection and the production of water, such deterioration of distribution that it has reached chronic proportions that more water is being lost through leaks than reaches the consumer household. And then critically, beyond access to water at the level of the household or institutions is a matter of water scarcity and what that is now going to mean in the context of climate change for our agriculture and food security agenda. On the environmental front, climate change and disaster-related infrastructural challenges are a big thing. In education, the challenge of schooling now, especially under the pandemic, poses many challenges. We have a conundrum of infrastructure school plans that now requires repurposing in the new normal. So we've built schools to house 500, 1,000 students, and now we have to slim down that very infrastructure because of the need to put a shift system to manage physical distancing. And thankfully, that work is being handled at the CARICOM level. There is a Caribbean task force looking at the new Caribbean school. The work of that task force predated the arrival of the pandemic, but since then we have had to pivot its work, and I have the honor of chairing that task force. We've had to pivot our work to look at schooling in the new normal. And a major part of that now is how do we move learning securely online and guarantee that learning happens. So the infrastructure of schooling now in the new normal is going to be largely home-based. The digital device, therefore, has to be taken into account, and ICT devices become an essential element of that new infrastructure. Again, there's room here for huge PPP opportunities and partnerships. To the social element of HEAS, the housing issue, because low-income housing is a priority to build household resilience and also to ensure safety in the face of disaster. And Dominica represents a prime example of this because after Hurricane Maria, massive destruction of the housing stock, over 90% of the stock destroyed. In post-Maria, an amazing recovery undertaken by the government of Dominica, wisely using its CIP funding in order to finance that process and with the assistance of diplomatic partners, but massive investment in housing, especially for the poor and the vulnerable. On the security front, we know that there are crime initiatives now being fostered by the local chambers of commerce, working with government, and there too are opportunities for engagement with international, state, and private partners. I want to end, Chairman, with just speaking quickly to, and I invite all of you to look at the website of the OECS, as well as a dedicated website, www.oecsSDM.com, which speaks to a sustainable development movement that we started in the OECS as an innovative way of sparking international, regional, and local interests in the acceleration of the regional integration process in the OECS. And you'll see there the statistics. We've had a viewership of aggregate of 12 million persons tuning in to some of the webinars and so on that we held. But this predated COVID, and with the advent of the pandemic, we quickly pivoted it to an online experience. And I think there that you will see, for example, one of the things that was presented was a set of 30 ready for market proposals in the blue oceans, the blue economy space, that was pitched to investors and public-private partnership. We had uptake of about 20 of these from governments like the government of Norway. We had private sector partners coming in wanting to express interest in being involved in some of these. As we move to 2021, we are launching SDM 2021. And within there is going to be, we're going to be taking that to a whole new level. So the OECS will be presenting clusters of projects in different areas of activity that would speak to the opportunity for public-private partnerships. And I welcome all of you to look out for the SDM 2021. Sign up. We are having a launch in February. On our website, you'll see the invitation to sign up. It's a free activity, so people can sign up and get a full picture of where we're going to be going with SDM 21. But the question of private-public partnerships are very much on the table in that seminal event. Lastly, to say that I think we have no choice, to your parable, Mr. Samuel, on how we treat Mr. PPE, because now it is not a matter of whether we like him or hate him or love him. The way forward requires that, as the government of St. Lucia says, all hands are on board, all hands on deck. So whether you are public, private, or civic organization, there is a role for everyone in the face of this concatenation of crises that we now face. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jules. Thank you. That was an excellent and impressive list of opportunities that the OECS islands are currently looking at. I just want to comment on two of them. One is the ferry, and you know that I have been working on that. That's one of the things dear to my heart for a long, long time now. And you are absolutely right. We don't want a LIAT on sea. It should be in private hands and privately run. And the other one is the health opportunities and the health challenges and the delivery of health systems. That's one of the cutting edge areas of private participation, and it would be great to see some improvement in the delivery of health service to our beleaguered populations, especially in these times. Thank you very much. So now we're going to go over to Mr. Anthony Rizk, who is the Director of Business Development and Sales at Canadian Commercial Corporation. Anthony, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Samuel. Thank you, everyone. Obviously, very honored to have the opportunity to present the Canadian Commercial Corporation and discuss our role as part of the Government of Canada's trade portfolio. The Canadian Commercial Corporation, established in 1946, we're a Crown corporation, wholly owned by the Government of Canada. As part of the Trade Commission, part of the trade portfolio in Canada, CCC works and leverages our partners in the Trade Commissioner Service that we find in embassies and high commissions and at Global Affairs headquarters, as well as Canada's Export Credit Agency, Export Development Canada. Our role is in facilitating trade between Canada and our international partner governments around the world. CCC is very active in the Caribbean. Our role in supporting and facilitating that trade is by providing a mechanism for government-to-government transactions. The Canadian Commercial Corporation, by virtue of acting as a prime contractor, facilitates trade with governments of national, regional, state, or municipal levels. We work with state-owned organizations, and our role is to provide assurance, a level of comfort to the buyer in working with Canadian solutions, Canadian exporters to execute on the delivery of these strategic assets. CCC's role in providing those services is predicated on an exhaustive due diligence. So we have a responsibility, not just a commercial, but a public policy in terms of ensuring that we are executing on the mandate of the government and ensuring that there's responsible trade from Canada to our international trade partners. At the government to government level, most of our experience is through unsolicited business. CCC is not typically involved in tenders, and in that role, what we do is attempt to, through our due diligence process, our vetting process, to ensure that when we are discussing a potential project with an international partner, that we bring the credibility that there's a serious partner from Canada that's looking to work with that government. Our role in those is not just to facilitate the transaction insofar as getting the contract signed, but more importantly, our commitment to the project is by virtue of being the contract manager throughout the life of that contract. The single greatest asset the CCC has is our ability to sign contracts. And when we sign a contract with an international buyer, we effectively commit the government of Canada to the performance of that. And what you have in that is the assurance of the terms and conditions are going to be honored by the government of Canada, and our responsibility to ensure that the execution of that project happens in accordance with those terms and conditions. Our experience in the Caribbean has been long. We not only work in infrastructure, I should preface this by saying we work in all sectors, essentially anything that Canada has to offer that CCC can qualify. We're happy to represent. I should mention that most of the activity that we have been pursuing in the Caribbean has been largely on the infrastructure side, and a larger push in the last few years on the clean tech side with respect to renewable energy projects, with respect to green infrastructure. Insofar as that's involved, we both work on the traditional EPC models, but also on the PPP models, most recently, as an example, the airport in Bermuda. Our role in those is to ensure that throughout the life of that, that the project proponent from Canada, the solution that we bring, isn't merely there to execute a project, but has the responsibility of ensuring that the project meets not just the standards, the minimum standards, but the standards that at the very least Canada would expect. And in those instances where the markets require a higher level of standard, both on environmental and other social environmental issues, that those standards are met as a minimum. CCC's role isn't just to facilitate trade. Our role is to expand our bilateral relations, and to that end, it's far more important for us to ensure that a project is executed appropriately in order to ensure that our relations with our international partners is growing, so that not one single project becomes a detriment to that project, to that relationship. So in that regard, CCC takes its relationships very seriously. It takes its due diligence of those projects very seriously, and our responsibility to ensure that when we're working with international partners, that we're bringing a serious, credible, and viable solution. CCC has been in the past year since the pandemic. I personally have been very busy insofar as receiving calls nonstop. At times, probably felt more like a call center as opposed to my normal role, and I think that has a large part to do with the fact that a lot of our exporters and some of our international buyers are looking for new ways to execute projects, and the aspect of our unsolicited proposals brings to the market opportunities to discuss solutions that hadn't yet been conceived. And so our role obviously is in presenting those options is to ensure that it's an option that the government of Canada is willing to support, again, in effect by signing that contract and committing the government of Canada to the execution of that project. We're very interested in working with the international governments in the Caribbean. We've had a long relationship there. We will continue to do so. CCC is putting more resources dedicated to both infrastructure and renewable energy as an effort to push those aspects of Canada abroad and to provide those solutions where they are best suited.
Excellent, Anthony. Thank you very much. I do know the work of CCC in the region. In particular, I know the work that you did on the St. Kitts second cruise ship here. And St. Kitts was, is a country that really did need additional capacity to service the cruise ship industry, which was booming and provides, as we know, a lot of income to smaller operators. So thank you very much. I think that was a very interesting set of comments. I'd like to kick off a few questions. Nicola, as we know, Jamaica has done very well. Somebody needs to mute. Jamaica has done and is doing very well in its PPP program, having mobilized over 1.7 million and rising, billion and rising in foreign direct investment. What really would you say are the real key success factors to getting a project from that long road from origination, concept, business case, transaction structure, and procurement? What are the real ingredients that make for success?
Brian, well, it's really about, the first thing is the project preparation. So that strong project preparation and institutional framework. We do have capacity built up in DBJ and Ministry of Finance PPP units, and then there's also capacity in other areas in government as well, National Road Operating Constructing Company, Airports Authority of Jamaica, Port Authority, NWC. So building that capacity and the strong project preparation is one. The second is the government's commitment to the PPP program with the successive administrations endorsing the program. And I suppose the third would just be having that centralized unit that is able to strategically look at the policy and the program and keep developing it and have lessons learned from the different transactions and just to have that cohesive force going forward.
As you say, Canada has a very mature PPP market, and PPPs are, standard operating procedure for procuring new infrastructure investments. Mind you, Canada is, a very large economy, both physically and financially. What lessons do you see from the Canadian PPP experience that could be applicable to the different market and different characteristics of the Caribbean?
So, to be clear, CCC obviously spends most of its time working abroad. We rely heavily, obviously, on the expertise of the exporters that we work with who have demonstrated that PPP experience to take that abroad. Obviously, as an organization, that will support a transaction. For us to be able to sign a contract, there's an immense amount of comfort that we need to bring to our stakeholders to ensure that we can in fact execute on that project. And so our project proponents, our exporters that have that experience, need to demonstrate to us their ability to transfer that skill set that they have in Canada abroad. Some of the pardon me, some of the challenges that we've had insofar, and probably more so magnified recently, obviously through the pandemic, is more around the financing side of things, which I'm sure is probably a very common complaint. Most people are always looking for money, much like CCC is. And so in that regard, what we try and do is assess those projects on the ability to actually be economically viable. But one of the big issues in terms of bringing financing, and so let me take an opportunity here for a moment. CCC predominantly works with commercial banks, large international commercial banks. We have yet to find a formula that can work with the IFIs, largely because the IFIs typically move in conjunction with tenders. CCC and pardon me, our exporters work with the unsolicited or directed format. So we work typically with commercial banks. One of the challenges that we have is in the development of the project, that early development, the pre-feasibility, the feasibility. In an EPC type model, we would bring an offer and ask for, or we'd submit a proposal on the basis of that upfront feasibility. Under a PPP model, oftentimes what we do is our project proponents will bring a holistic solution that includes that upfront development, which, as you know, can be pretty expensive to develop on the part of the government. The question is always who pays for that aspect of the development, because if the project doesn't move forward, the investors, the project proponents, are looking to at least recuperate the expenditure of having brought the project up to a certain point of having the feasibility done. And so typically in a PPP, we're looking to have some level of assurance that if the project doesn't move ahead, if for whatever reason the buyer decides to move in a different direction, that we can at least recuperate the costs that the project proponents have put into the development phase. That is probably one of our larger challenges insofar as how do we work through the mechanisms that allow for that to happen. And related to that is how we work with the buyers, the governments that we're working with, and more specifically in terms of finding the balance between how much ownership or control the private entity will have over the project versus what the government retains as part of that project. And obviously on the PPP spectrum, there's a wide range from very limited to privatization. But that aspect, having cleared that up initially and having grappled with that, makes for a much more productive relationship going forward. And that's another aspect that the pandemic has again probably magnified, is the dynamics around what could have been viable under a model pre-COVID has changed dramatically for the time being, and it's hopefully temporary and transient, and but the negotiation around that really is around how much that balance of sharing of the responsibilities on the project, and in that regard, we probably spend a lot of time upfront trying to ensure that is cleared so that the relationship can proceed under very clear terms. Brian, I'm sorry, I think you're on mute.
Oops, I'm not listening to my own advice. Thank you. Some questions are coming in, and I see an interesting one from Laura, who is concerned about the lack of mainstreaming of climate change in PPPs, and most of them are still being classified as force majeure. How do you see climate change being mainstreamed? And I'd like to address that one to Nicola, because I believe that you are doing some work in Jamaica about producing a climate change handbook or so on, and incorporating climate change into the whole PPP cycle?
Yes, Brian. With IDB's assistance, there's a consultancy that developed a toolkit, climate resiliency toolkit, and that's available online. And essentially, what we're doing is we're working through how to incorporate it into the policy and practice of how do we develop PPPs. So the climate change resiliency will be a part of how we develop projects going forward.
Interesting. I'd like to, there's another question. In which Caribbean countries do you see the more room for private participation in the energy transmission and distribution? Well, I'd say energy in general, including all phases, because renewable energy, let's not forget that all of the islands, not just islands, but all of the countries within the region are actively pursuing renewable energy. Obviously, I would see Jamaica as being a really example of where it has grabbed the bull by the horns. Wind and solar in the last, how many, 15 years, 10, 15 years, now accounts for about 16 or 17% of the national generating capacity in Jamaica. And all of it is in private hands. In fact, I'm a shareholder of Wigton Wind Farm. So, you know, that really has, that has really taken off. Dr. Jules, we're getting close to the end of the session now. Maybe I could just ask you a question regarding my home, our home, the OECS. You know, we're always told we're small islands. You know, when I was at Mona, you get called small islander all the time. And as irritating as that could be. But, you know, size does matter in public-private partnerships. According to conventional wisdom, you know, we're beneath the radar screen of the global investors. A, is this really true? And B, do you see some scope for bundling opportunities within the OECS territories? Because the OECS territories were all first cousins of each other. We all very similar systems and legal and institutional systems. So perhaps, say, bundling airport opportunities, water, healthcare, education, and so on. Dr. Jules, you're muted.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yes, I said all of the above in what you said. Size is a vulnerability in its own right, with limitations of population size equals small market opportunities, equals in the view of some investors on sustainability. But there's also the other side to it, as was made famous by Schumacher. Small can be beautiful, and what we often pitch to investors and persons interested in public-private partnerships in the OECS is that we have the opportunity of scaling solutions, offering an ideal petri dish where a solution, particularly those solutions that require complex partnerships and arrangements or different moving pieces being brought together, we are an ideal size to experiment and to work on that so that we can show the workability of a solution and look to scale that up over larger population jurisdictions. I wanted to also say that, so yes, there are opportunities for bundling and so on. And at the OECS, that is one of the reasons why we launched the Sustainable Development Movement, because we wanted to give that narrative, to paint that picture of the attractive possibilities in the OECS for really taking some cutting edge solutions and leapfrogging technology so that we don't have to walk the same road that everyone walked painstakingly to evolve into solutions that can address climate change, etc. The bundling would obviously deal with huge opportunities in energy, in transportation, some of the areas that I mentioned earlier. But I also want to point out that we have faced intractable problems in dealing in energy, for example, with the existing ownership of some of our utility companies. And I can say that about 3 years ago, we had a major project with the World Bank on energy, trying to move that, to do that, assist us with that transition to green and sustainable energy in the OECS. And the project literally fell apart because the owners of the utilities, many of whom are foreign owned, had some very sweetheart deals, from some of it going back to colonial times, which guaranteed them certain rates of return, and therefore tied the hands of the public sector in terms of policy formulation that would ensure that we were able to see electricity, for example, being provided to even the poorest homes at reasonable rates. So that has been a huge challenge. But I think the governments, because the global climate is changing, they have had to adjust and pivot to a more accommodating stance. And so investment in that area is critical. Lastly, I want to say that we need to, the whole nature of public-private partnerships I would say pre-COVID, was seen largely in terms of opportunities for foreign investors to come in, work with governments, but really look at the profitable opportunities. I think now the whole concept of private-public partnerships is pivoting more and more towards impact investment, sustainable investment, opportunities for doing well by doing good. And that obviously requires a different attitude to risk. It requires different timelines for profitability. But in the long run, the planet and the investors will be better off. Lastly, from the OECS end, we are also moving assiduously to encourage our governments to build into all of these investment opportunities and policies areas where nationals of the OECS, even persons at the lowest income levels, can participate in the shareholding, so that we build a culture of shareholding. We see the amazing work that has been done in Jamaica to that end, where Jamaicans are able, through mutual funds and so on, to invest in initiatives. Our credit unions in the OECS are sitting on literally billions of EC dollars. What do they do with that? They bank it in the private banking, in the commercial banking sector. They get interest rates of about 2 or 3%, and that is on lent by the commercial sector at 7%. Why can't, for example, a good example I use in Labrie in St. Lucia, which is a very beautiful rural coastal community. For years, there have been talks about the need for a hotel in the Labrie area. Perfect location for village tourism. We are looking at foreign investors to do this. The Labrie Credit Union is sitting on almost $500,000, a couple million EC dollars in savings. Why can't they build a hotel in the community owned by them, leased to a major chain? You own the asset, you provide employment, you've invested in your own community. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Jules. Well, I think that was a very fascinating opening panel. I think we heard from each of them, and I'm sorry that Mr. Cartwright from the Bahamas had some technical challenges. I hope I did you some justice, Anthony. It was interesting to hear, Nicola, the practical cases of what is happening in Jamaica and your secrets to success. And Anthony and Dr. Jules, thank you all very much. So we will now transition to the second session. And while we do that, while everybody gets in and out of the room, we've heard this morning that the key to a good PPP project is preparation, preparation, preparation. You literally cannot prepare enough for a large PPP project. But even then, sometimes we get it wrong. Now, I'm not bashing Britain, but this example comes from the UK, the M6 toll road. And I've been on this toll road, I know it for myself. This was touted as, it was opened in 2003, and it was touted as a way of relieving congestion on other free highways. They forecast traffic of 75,000 vehicles per day. And on a good day, they may get 35,000. And this is in England, where they claim to have invented PPPs. So, we can all get it wrong sometimes. So my second panel. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'd like to introduce Vikram Kothari. He's from the World Bank. He's the program leader of sustainable development and infrastructure in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. Second, Gaston Astenazio. Hi, Gaston. IDB. He's the PPP team leader within IDB. And João Rey Sabino from Global Infrastructure Facility, and he is an infrastructure specialist. And Elena Sela, who is an IFC, my old alma mater IFC investment officer. Good morning to my four panelists. So I would throw the floor open to you, Vikram. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Just checking on the sound. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Just checking if you have a question or if we just start by talking about our experience and some maybe recommendation on for the Caribbean.
Yes. Yes, the floor is yours. To make your opening statements and so on, and then we can get through individual Q's and A's, both from myself and from the audience.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm honored to be here and talk about our experience in PPP in the region and globally. I represent the World Bank. As in the introduction, I'm the program leader for the Caribbean, so I focus a lot on our engagement in sustainable development and infrastructure. So we have a strong presence in the Caribbean. Our program is very much focused on resilience, and we take what we call a 360 approach to resilience, where we look at the physical, the environmental, the financial, and the human aspect, and obviously most recently COVID. So on PPP, our experience is obviously global, and we've been involved in the whole cycle from providing financing for government contribution to risk mitigation at transaction phase. So we work closely with IFC, and Richard Cabello in the next session will certainly elaborate on IFC expertise. I think when we look at the Caribbean, what is interesting is that, obviously it's not, it's important, I think, in my view, to differentiate between countries. You have overall some countries that manage to have successful PPP, and many countries where bringing a project to the market and reach financial close has been a challenge. So, and I can elaborate on some of the reason we identified based on our experience in the region. But somehow, I think when we look at PPP countries, my advice would be that countries could maybe have an assessment of their own capacity and experience and what they want PPP to achieve. The strategy for a country like Jamaica, which has a track record of PPP successful PPP transaction, is going to be different from the strategy of a country which hasn't closed on any project in the last 5 years. The other aspect is when we look at the pipeline, it can tell us the level of effort that we have to put on the different pieces. So if you want to push on one sector, say energy and renewable or general energy, the effort on capacity building or maybe the institutional arrangement will be different from a country that wants PPP to represent a sizable share of the program. So I'll stop here, and then I can always answer some questions. Oh.
Excellent, Vikram. Thank you very much. I would like to now turn over to Gaston Astesiano, IDB PPP team leader. Gaston, over to you. Gaston, you're muted.
I'm not
There
able
we
to.
go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much.
We're not hearing you. You're muted now.
Now?
Now we're hearing you. Okay, now we're.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what is going on. I'm not touching anything and it turns off. Thank you very much for the invitation. I think as Vikram said, the region has a mixed experience in PPPs and different levels of progress and development on the PPP programs. Clearly, Jamaica being the leader, and we from the IDB group, we have always been trying to support and find opportunities to the countries that are interested in mobilizing private capital to infrastructure. That is why we have an integral approach with our PPP single window, where we combine upstream work with transactional support, and that allows us to support the whole life cycle of the PPP program from the very early stage, regulatory framework, institutional capacity development, to transactional support, and even to execution and monitoring support. I think we are moving in the Caribbean and in Latin America in particular to a new situation where the fiscal space is going to be restricted, more restricted than it used to be. We have been studying this, how this will impact not only investment in infrastructure in general, but also operation and maintenance. The region, our research department has studied this very thoroughly, and we can see how both the Caribbean and Latin America tend to cut capex expenditure and operation and maintenance expenditure in fiscal restriction or fiscal consolidation scenarios like the one we're going to be facing in the next 2 years, 21 and 22 at least. And I think this will generate opportunities for well-structured projects, both brownfield with some element of rehabilitation in the case of transportation, or expansion in the case of other infrastructures. Resilience is also a big priority and a point, not only because of our corporate priorities, but also the way the climate change affects the region in the Caribbean. That's why we generated a guideline of resilient PPPs with the Jamaican government and our climate change department, but also the PPP, the IDB group, climate change and PPP team have been working leading the G20 indicators for sustainable infrastructure. So the development on resilience infrastructure are now the ones that are being supported by the G20, all the other MDBs. And I think this is a real opportunity to start to think out of the box and to replicate successful stories. And in the new scenario of restricted fiscal space and potential contingent liabilities, we have been working with Professor Eduardo Engel in Chile, where they have a very interesting model for mainly transportation facilities, airports and roads particularly, in where you can grant PPPs or concessions with a flexible period term, which allows to guarantee the return of the income of the projects, but do not generate any contingent liability upfront, in the sense that only will be compensated with more duration for the contract. We will be showcasing these papers through our PPP network, knowledge and best practices, in February, and I'll invite everyone that wants to participate in that event. Will be a webinar, an open webinar, and I think there is a lot to work to find good bankable projects in the Caribbean. I stop here and I'm glad to participate of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gaston. Excellent comments, and we look forward to some questions after the next two speakers. And we would like to turn over now to Ilona Sela from IFC. And IFC is a lot more than just provider of funds, but there's also wealth. Over to you, Elena.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone. Yes, as you said, Brian, I am part of the Transaction Advisory Services in PPPs, and we specialize in advising governments in introducing private sector participation in infrastructure services. So yes, IFC is not only investment. When our services are engaged, we are the lead advisors to the government on structuring and implementing PPP solutions that are done in a manner that both meet the government objectives, but at the same time allow for bankable projects. And we do so in a manner that it can guarantee the long-term sustainability of the project. When we are involved, it really maximizes transparency to ensure both from the investor confidence, but also public sector support of the process. So I just wanted to take a little moment today to talk about how do we do all of this. We definitely do take a staged approach. And as a reference, I can mention a recent transaction that the IFC Transaction Advisory team closed successfully in the Caribbean, the Norman Manley International Airport, where we were the lead advisor to the government of Jamaica on structuring a PPP, and we took the government through all these stages. This was done through, obviously, Development Bank and the Airport Authority of Jamaica. Before we even sign a mandate with the government, we do some preparation work, and as we've been talking about so far, preparation is important. And as you said, there can never be enough of that. But we do a little bit of a feasibility work really to understand with the information that is available if there are any red flags that we need to know before we get involved in the project, or even let the government know before they actually want to get involved in a project. Once we sign a mandate, then we start with the structuring phase, which is really starting off with the due diligence and looking at the aspects of the project from a technical, legal, financial, environmental, and social and communications aspects of the project. Besides the financial modeling work, which is done in-house by IFC, we do hire specialized consultants for the technical, legal, and as I said, environmental, social, and communication aspects. So in case of Jamaica, for example, the specialized consultants that were hired were funded through the Canadian government, through the Global Affairs Canada, with which IFC has had a strong partnership in the Caribbean. And based on the results of the due diligence, we'll then use that information to actually provide a recommended structure to the government on how do we see this transaction look like, more in terms of risk allocation, how that should look like in terms of between public and private sector, payment mechanism, tender strategy, contractual terms. So for Jamaica, for example, the government decided to take over the responsibility. The government would take over the responsibility of monitoring the contract, licensing, and issuing permits, immigrations and customs, police, quarantine services at the airport, while the concessionaire would have been responsible for the operation and maintenance of the airport, construction and financing of any expansion plans during the life of the concession. It is also important to mention that we do market sounding during this stage, really because it's important to get the investors and the market perspective as part of our thinking process about the structure that we're proposing to the government. Because as I said before, we do try to meet the government's objectives, but at the same time, we also have to be realistic about the market conditions. Once the structure is submitted to the government and is reviewed and accepted, then we move to the next stage, which is really the implementation of the competitive tender process. We start this one with really market sounding, which means investor conferences, roadshows, information memorandums. Really, the purpose here is to get as much traction as possible from the private sector on the transaction. So, for example, for the Norman Manley International Airport, we did 2 investor conferences, one international and one local, and the local was particularly important because it really attracted local interest and presented the project to the local market. That way, then, these local investors could partner with the international investors as part of their consortia for the bid stage. IFC then, together with the technical and legal consultants, will draft the bidding documents, the contractual agreements, the bid criteria to present to the government so they can finalize, approve, and launch the tender process. Our involvement is also critical in the negotiation stage and during bidders' due diligence, not only answering questions, but really assisting the government in those important decisions that they have to make as part of the negotiation process. And as a last step, we're there for the government during their evaluation process and getting this project to successful closing. So I think, as most of people know in this forum, the Norman Manley Airport received 3 bids. 3 compliant bids, with the winning bidder announced in September 2018. Signing of the contract was done in October 2018, and then a year later it reached financial closing and handover to the private operator. So in a nutshell, this is really what we do as part of our work as advising governments for PPPs. I'm just going to, in closing, say that we have been doing this for over 30 years. We have closed about 140 transactions, over 55 countries. So we do have an established track record in this business. However, it's not easy. There's always something to learn, and it's always very, very difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Ilona. And I'm proud to say that for 20 of those 30 years, I was with the advisory department. So I have some very fond memories of my time there. Last, we would like to hand over to Mr. Joao Reis Sabino, who's from the Global Infrastructure Facility, and he's an infrastructure specialist. And what does GIF have for the Caribbean? Joao, over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks everyone. So I'm João Sabino. I'm responsible for the GIF operations in the Caribbean region. I'll briefly provide an overview of the GIF, talk about the GIF's instruments and strategic considerations for the Caribbean. So as many of you know, the GIF is a global collaboration platform that supports governments in the preparation and structuring of high quality, bankable and sustainable infrastructure projects. It was a G20 initiative that emerged from the perception that the lack of well-structured projects was one of the main bottlenecks for the development of infrastructure in emerging markets. As a result, the GIF objective is mainly to mobilize private investment contributing to economic and social development. The GIF is designed to provide a new way of collaboration on project preparation. As such, on our engagements, they are all based in partnerships. We have governments as the main beneficiary countries of GIF resources and the main actors of infrastructure development. We have our technical partners, which are the MDBs, which are the lead project advisors with whom we partner to provide project support. Currently in the Caribbean, we have the technical partners that are speaking with me in this panel, the World Bank, IDB, and IFC. And working with the GIF, you can then work with your preferred MDB partner. Also, we have our advisory partners. Advisory partners are private sector institutions. We're talking about institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, asset managers, and investment banks, to which we connect to promote investment opportunities that are supported by the GIF, and also to test ideas, to have a market view of projects that are supported by the GIF. So how do we work? Well, basically, we provide funds and hands-on expertise to support projects from early engagements to the full-fledged project structuring. We have 3 instruments mainly. The PRA, which is Project Readiness Assessment. This instrument serves to take stock of a project and assess its readiness to move to the market. Based on an in-house methodology, we assess and rate 6 key components of projects: technical aspects, commercial structure and financing, affordability, government elements, regulatory environment, and also social and environmental impacts. The idea is, once this assessment is done, we define where the project is, if it's ready to go to the market, or if other steps are needed, such as amending the project and changing it before taking to the market. This work usually takes between 6 and 8 weeks. It's done on a grant basis, and the grants are around $100,000. Secondly, we have a PDA, which we call the project definition activity. This is mostly pre-feasibility studies, but can also be used as a tool for infrastructure planning and prioritization. The idea here is to assess early on and identify potential obstacles and opportunities, as well as to understand market views. We do market soundings in this case, to understand the project before engaging into a lengthy and expensive project structuring. The idea here is to act early on and identify critical issues for a future project preparation. Those studies that are done under PDAs are then used afterwards in full feasibility, and the PDAs are usually implemented through grants. The grants are up to $500,000. Lastly, we have our Ppsa support. Ppsas are generally our main instrument. These are project preparation and structuring activities. This encompasses all the full feasibility support that's needed to project structuring, from project design, risk allocation, structuring, development of legal documents, project promotion, roadshow, and the support stays up to commercial or financial closing. These are mostly reimbursable, and the amount varies according to project needs. Recently, we also had a COVID-19 window approved at the GIF. This is to support projects that were impacted by the pandemic and that may eventually need additional support before going to the market. Also, in this window, we are supporting countries' responses to the pandemic. We had a couple of requests, for example, for health PPP projects as a response to the pandemic. Well, the GIF stands ready to contribute to the Caribbean countries in efforts to mobilize the needed private investments. Mostly, as you saw, we worked focused on projects and programs, yet in many circumstances where regulatory barriers are an impediment for project progression, one potential solution that the GIF has used in other regions and is valid to the Caribbean is to look for partnerships with MDBs, not only focused on projects, but going a little upstream and trying to assess and create an enabling environment through regulatory changes. The idea is, as a result of this engagement, you have from regulatory elements to pilot transactions coming out as a result of our engagement. Another key aspect of the GIF for the Caribbean, I think, is related to interactions with private players. And to that extent, the GIF Advisory Partners Network can offer views to structure successful transactions. We do look forward in engaging with you and your country to support your infrastructure efforts in collaboration with our partners, existing and future ones, and donors, such as Canada, which has a special focus in the Caribbean region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joao. That was a very interesting presentation, and all four speakers, thank you very much. I think what we've seen here is a range of technical and financial support measures that are available for Caribbean and Latin American governments in seeking to promote, develop, and structure and procure their projects. I mean, we know how difficult and how expensive and how much capacity, technical capacity we need to bring to these large projects to get them off the ground and running. And I think that is a very valuable listing of support mechanisms that the four presenters have made this morning. I'd just like to go back to Ilona for 1 second. We know that IFC, I don't know which is the largest. In my days, of course, IFC financing was by far the largest section of IFC, but advisory and also other forms of advisory assistance have, really increased a lot in the last 20 years. How is between advising a government and then financing a project, how is the transition from those two activities or phases handled? Are there Chinese walls and so forth?
Absolutely. It's a very good question, Brian. And I think the short answer of that is yes. There are large Chinese wall between the two departments. And I think that is very critical because the governments we advise are certain that the advice we're giving to them is not really for our benefit as the organization. Obviously, the countries that IFC investment covers is the same that IFC advisory covers. So there will be interest from potential investors to go and approach IFC investment on that on the projects that we are advising. But from an advisory purpose, we do really set those Chinese walls because we are serving our clients, our governments, and they have to be comfortable that the advice that we're giving to them is in the best interest of project and not really in the interest of a project then going to be financed by IFC financing. And to be certain, I don't have the figures in front of me, but not all, if not many projects that we actually advise get financed by IFC financing. There's a lot of interest there from other lenders that actually do provide financing to these projects. So I think in that respect, it's very, very separate business lines.
Okay, excellent. Well, amazingly, we are absolutely bang on target time-wise. So I would like to thank my 4 presenters from the multilaterals, from GIF, from IFC, from IDB Invest, and from the World Bank. Thank you very much for your contributions, and we will now transition to the next panel. So, I mean, we've seen IDB, IFC, WBG, GIF, GAC, CDB, EIB, FMO, DEG. This is to name but a few members of the MDB alphabet soup. Now, having worked with 3 of them, the MDB is an animal I'm fairly familiar with. And the first thing you need to know about the MDB species is that they are very large animals. Some of them are larger than our entire countries. Each one of them thinks that they're the king of the jungle. And they are also, in addition to large, they like to do things their own way. But also, the MDBs can provide a lot of technical assistance needed for project development in the Caribbean. So don't be afraid to ask. They can provide grant funding for early stage project development and so forth. So they say the squeaky wheel gets the grease, so don't be afraid to squeak. I see my panel is ready this morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Ivan, Michelle.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning.
So let me just introduce the panel. Ivan Anderson is the head of NROC, National Roads Operating and Construction Company of Jamaica, who have done great work with their toll road concessions and their other projects. Michelle Ottie is a senior investment officer at IFC, and she'll be talking about their successful work in the Norman Manley International Airport transaction. Evan Caetano is from IDB Invest. Evan, I think you're still based in Jamaica?
That's correct. I'm not sure IDB sovereign side, not IDB Invest.
Okay, IDB. And he'll be talking about the non-revenue water PPP in the Bahamas. And finally, Giselle. Is Giselle here? Giselle will, from is head of the PPP unit in the Tobago House of Assembly, and she will be talking about their low-income housing PPP project, which is just beginning to take off. So, without further ado, over to you, Ivan.
Hi, good morning. Are you hearing me? Thank you, and thank you, Brian, for the invitation. Brian knows just as much as I do about this project. Brian has actually written a case study published in 2017, Brian, on the Highway 2000 project. Just a little to tell you a little bit about where we were and where we are. Some of the issues that Brian mentioned, I think, are in terms of the M6 in the UK are probably also issues which happened to us as well. We started back in 2001 with a $320 million concession for 35 years to build about 50 kilometers of highway. The highway was adjacent to the Kingston metropolitan area. And when we started, as I think all the speakers have said, we did a lot of work in preparing for the project. The structure of the project was facilitated by the GOJ in terms of subordinated loans. So we subordinated maybe $100 million of loans to the project in order to get it going. At the time, it was difficult to attract the multilaterals to the project. And in fact, we started with our regional banks, RBTT at the time, who financed the project. In that initial structure, we had no traffic guarantees, which helped us with the issue of no traffic or revenue guarantees, which helped us with issues related to predicting traffic, especially, all the kind of things that we see happening, oil price spikes, COVID, depression. So we structured the project so that those risks weren't ours. But one of the risks that we did have was the issue of competing roads. And I suppose this is probably similar for a lot of toll roads. So where the government builds alternative roads within the same corridor, then those issues require compensation to the developer. So that was our first project. We then moved on to another project, which we call our North-South Highway project, which tries to connect the north and south coast of Jamaica. That project was actually part of the original concession, but the developer chose not to exercise that option at the time, partly because of the traffic levels, which were much lower, obviously, than the traffic situation around the Kingston metropolitan area. And so, similar to the original project, it was structured in a similar way. We had no traffic guarantees, no revenue guarantees. But obviously, because that project had a lot less traffic, we had to find a way to motivate the developer to invest. And so for that project, we used what was unique for us. We provided lands as part of the development. So we didn't provide any funding, we didn't provide any subordinated loans, we didn't provide any loans at all, but we did provide lands. So we provided land along the corridor of the highway for the development of the project, to allow the developer to build other facilities, housing, hotels, commercial developments along the highway in order to increase the traffic and therefore make the development much more feasible. Those lands obviously come back to the government of Jamaica should the developments not proceed in keeping with the time frames that we had set out originally. So those are the two concessions that we did initially. As Brian said, predicting traffic is obviously a difficult business. And so recently, predicting traffic and also the issue of competing roads. So after 20 years of operating, we found that some of the competing roads obviously had started to have significant amount of traffic on it. Obviously, a toll road makes money from congestion on free roads. And so you have a conflict taking place in the government about how to deal with this issue of congestion on free roads. Do I expand my free roads, or do I compensate the developer do I expand free roads and compensate the developer, or do I force the public to take the toll roads? And so it's a push and pull situation which takes place, for us, between what we do on the free roads as against trying to encourage people to use the toll roads. So we found ourselves in a situation where we had to modify that because the government wanted to improve the free roads, and that therefore they created a claim on the concession company. So that took us through another whirlwind of refinancing. We purchased back the concession agreement. So we went out to the market and we raised short-term bridging financing. We came to an agreement with the developers, with the owners of the concession, who were two large multilateral corporations, including the IFC and Proparco, and two large French contractors. We came to an agreement with them, and we bought back the concession agreement from them. We thought we could buy it back. We thought we could refinance it at low interest rates and therefore pay for the costs associated with the transaction. We then floated the concession which we had bought back on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, becoming the largest ever transaction ever to be done on IPO, ever to be done on local stock exchange, for us 125 million US. We floated the concession on the stock exchange, and then we went out and did our Reg S 144 instrument in the US bond market to refinance some of the bridging loans. So we did a further $220 million in the US market to pay back some of the money that we used in the original transaction. So that transformed the whole concession agreement. And it also did some things which we didn't anticipate. Obviously, we we removed the competing roads provision, but we also removed some of the backstops that we had in the concession. So initially the concessions had a backstop for the lenders, in that the lenders were protected in the case of default. When we redid the concession, we were able to remove those backstops. So that those kind of protections didn't exist for the lenders in for a developer default. So we've come through a whirlwind of a transaction. It closed maybe a few days before the pandemic hit. I don't know what would have happened if it was a week later, but that's where we are today. Maybe I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Brian.
Excellent. Thank you, Ivan. Your timing was absolutely perfect. Closing of that transaction. And I know Jamaica's highways. They are, compared to when I used to live in Jamaica, what, 30 years ago, the road stock has improved out of all recognition. Thank you very much. And next, I would like to introduce Michelle Ottie, who's a senior investment officer, who's going to talk about their work on the Norman Manley. And again, I have a picture of me in like the 1992, standing in Norman Manley Airport, drenched with sweat. Drenched, absolutely. Air conditioning wasn't working. At that time, it was the worst airport in the world, but it's not that now. So over to you, Michelle.
Okay, I won't have a complex or anything since I'm Jamaican, but it's okay. I think, Brian, I think for us really, as we look at the evolution of PPPs in the Caribbean, I think, listening to Ivan talking about the roads, but also, the airports in Jamaica, I think those have been pivotal transactions in terms of opening up investor interest in the region. Because what we see is, the Caribbean, in terms of there's been interest in PPPs, but as we look at some of the larger transactions where you have greater visibility with local, with regional, with global investors, has really opened up the market. Norman Manley was one of those that was not an easy, it was not an easy transaction. It is really a fantastic asset. But in terms of tendering that, we had to look very carefully at the provisions when tendering that to ensure that we had the right structure, a balanced structure for both parties, and ensuring that we had a viable transaction. Ilona had spoken a little bit about that. At the end of the day, Norman Manley attracted investors, and it was nice to see a mix of both global and local investors as part of Norman Manley bidding on that. And ultimately, in the award of that transaction, it mobilized in excess of about 100 million for the government of Jamaica for this transaction, which is earmarked for works on both the air side as well as on the land side of the terminal. But as I think about Norman Manley, the success of Norman Manley, in my perspective, goes beyond the actual transaction. It goes to the demonstration effect of doing transactions in the region, because Norman Manley really has been a flagship transaction that I think has opened up the eyes of other governments. It has also opened up the eyes of other governments. And so if you look at the success of the Norman Manley transaction, I think that has been for the government of Barbados a segue in terms of looking and sort of saying, okay, well, this is a model that works. And it's a similar concession structure that we're looking at in Barbados, because Norman Manley was not an outright privatization, even though that terminology is used. It was a concession of the airport, because you're taking an asset which is a strategic asset of the government, and you really want, in that instance, for ownership to be retained. But what you're really looking for is to develop it into a world-class airport. And so really, the objective of the transaction was literally to identify a private sector operator who would come in, who would complete the development plan, because the government had made significant investment in the upgrading of the airport, who would complete that development plan and essentially take that airport to the next level. And that essentially brought the focus of a number of investors to the region. We have since started working with the Grantley Adams International Airport, Inc. And the government of Barbados on their airport. And it's interesting that almost all of the investors that bid on Norman Manley went to be pre-qualified when we opened up the tender for Grantley Adams. And so what we're seeing right now is very strong interest in the region. And people may say, oh, but you're in the middle of COVID and you're doing an airport. Yeah, good luck with that. Right in the middle of the pandemic, during COVID, we pre-qualified 13 investors for the airport. And so that gives you an idea. And these are local investors that includes investors from Barbados, regional investors. We have investors who have come from other parts of the region, such as Jamaica. We have international investors. And so a very interesting field shaping up. And the feedback that we're hearing from investors continue to look for strong emerging markets assets where they can get good yields, where there are well-structured transactions. And so for us as IFC, it really creates an opportunity for us working in conjunction with our regional governments to see how we can support that, because there really are huge opportunities at this time. And our support is really full service in terms of helping them on project identification, helping them really in preparing those transactions, as Ilona would have mentioned, and really essentially helping them to structure the bid process, to manage the entire bid process, to promote to investors and take this through to closing. And so as we look at it, I think when we look at it, people look at COVID kind of in a negative light, but I do think it is almost a perfect storm. There are investors who are looking for strong assets. There are governments that have huge infrastructure gaps to be filled, and it cannot be done all by public sector. There are opportunities to leverage private expertise, to leverage private capital. And there are a number of sectors, I think, in the region that are ripe for that. And so as I listened to Dr. Jules in the first segment, a number of the sectors that he spoke about is exactly where the Caribbean is at. Transport, because at the end of the day, we're island economies. Transport into and out of our islands, transport within our islands, movement of goods and services. Energy is a factor for our islands, cost of energy, and so looking more at renewables, looking at other utilities, water and sanitation, huge opportunities there. And so we have investors who are sort of saying, we're interested in the region, and if we have to come in and do due diligence on one transaction, we want to know what else is coming. And so as advisors, really here, what we're looking at is to see how can we take a more strategic and programmatic approach in supporting governments and in supporting clients who want to do maybe not one transaction. As you listen to Ivan talking about roads, a number of road packages. Can we package transactions together, for example, to bring greater efficiencies and really move our execution to the next level? So just some thoughts in terms of where we stand now. And some of the opportunities that we're seeing in COVID.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That was a very interesting transaction, and I know that it was a labor of love for IFC. And I also know that IFC goes above and beyond the call of duty in these kinds of things. So congratulations on a job well done. I've just put a link to an earlier privatization in Jamaica. I did a case study a few years ago. I think I like to do these case studies on the Montego Bay Airport privatization, and I think I need to update that with a case study on Norman Manley. So watch out, Michelle. I'm going to be picking your large brain very soon.
Absolutely, you know where to find me.
I know where to find you. You can't hide. Next, I'd like to turn over to Evan Cayetano. Evan is a water engineer from IDB, and he's going to talk about the fantastic project that happened in Nassau a few years ago with the reduction in non-revenue water. So Evan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thanks for the invitation on this esteemed panel. Just a commentary before I get into some remarks, that NRW, non-revenue water, is a huge problem across the Caribbean. On average, from the benchmarking studies we've done, non-revenue water is around 45% of the input volume into this water supply systems across the region. And suffice it to say that any private sector entity losing 45% of its product would not be in business. So there is a huge potential to deal with these issues, with this issue of non-revenue water, but there are other attendant issues that are challenging the preparation and execution of operations to attend to this, what I would consider to be vexing problem. Coming to the project at hand, that was indeed a success. The project in the Bahamas. This project took place between 2012 and 2017 in the island of New Providence, Bahamas, which encompasses Nassau. The island of New Providence accounts for approximately 70% of the total population of the country. However, only 54% of dwellings had access to water supplied by the Water and Sewerage Corporation, WSC. At the start of the project, around 2011, the number of live residential connections was around 38,000. This corresponded to about 133,000 persons out of the total New Providence population of 248,300 at the time. Due to the level of quality of service, especially low pressures at the time, occasional reddish water, and the lack of regulatory regime enforcing connections, many customers had terminated their relationship with the WSC and made alternative arrangements for their water supply and using private wells. WSC is a publicly owned or state-owned utility in the Bahamas, established under an Act of Parliament, 1976, and has a mandate to provide adequate supplies of water for domestic use, agricultural purposes, urban and industrial use, as well as to provide adequate facilities for drainage and safe disposal of sewage and industrial effluents. This is not unlike what obtains in most of our countries that have state-owned water utilities that provide the service. This includes, of course, sewage services in addition to the water supply service. The Bahamas is considered a water scarce country by international standards and by far the lowest in Latin America and the Caribbean. Available renewable water per capita is around 59 meter cube compared to 68,000 meter cube average for Latin America and the Caribbean. Fresh water is basically non-existent. The country therefore relies on groundwater as the single source of water which is available, and this comes from rainfall. Over-abstraction of groundwater is a major concern. As you would know, over-abstraction causes saltwater intrusion into freshwater aquifer, creating a situation where you have to just abandon the wells, either permanently or for a long period of time. At the time of the preparation of the project, the well fields on New Providence had a maximum capacity of about 1.5 million imperial gallons of fresh water per day, while the demand was for approximately 10 million imperial gallons. Of this amount, about 0.7 million imperial gallons was taken from well fields, and the balance was supplied by reverse osmosis and barging from Andros to New Providence. The reality of climate change and lack of proper sewage collection and treatment, which contributes to contamination of groundwater, of course, would exacerbate the issue of water availability in Nassau, in New Providence. As demand for water exceeds the available freshwater sources, WSC expanded supply through expensive reverse osmosis production, and as I said, barging. As a result, supply from result osmosis grew over 450% between 2000 and 2011, increasing WSC's cost for water purchased by about US $20 million over that time period. In this context of limited supply and high cost of expansion, the economic losses of high non-revenue water you could imagine is very considerable. WSC had NRW levels of about 50% when the project started. And these were related to mainly bad condition of the network, lack of maintenance, inadequate commercial practices, etc., which are, again are typical of the water utilities services in the rest of the Caribbean. With respect to the actual project itself, the development and execution of this performance-based contract were done in phases. First, between 2008-2009, WSC developed a non-revenue water reduction strategy that included institutional reforms, management improvements, non-revenue water reduction activities. And NRW activities is not just leak detection and repair, it has to do with metering, it has to do with pressure management, etc. Customer win-back, regulatory reforms, and increased tariff study. These were all things, preparatory activities done by WSC with the support of the IDB. Secondly, in 2009, WSC prepared the request for proposals targeting 2.5 million imperial gallon per day reduction and to reach a pressure of 25 psi. The reduction targeted would have been about 50% of the supply input volume. They then conducted a competitive process using quality-based selection. And then the third phase was begun in 2012 after the signing of the performance-based contract with MIA, and which features included 70% fixed payment and 30% performance-based. The performance compensation was based on the volume of water saved at a unit price of $2.40 per 1,000 imperial gallons. The contract also provided for inflation adjustment and allowance for adjustment of the performance measures. The PBC, performance-based contract, was implemented in 3 phases. First was the baseline and diagnostic phase, which includes detailed validation of the water audit. The contractor had to satisfy himself that indeed what was being put forward by the WSC was in their agreement and would be the starting point for the work. It was found during this validation period that the NRW was much higher than estimated, actually, mostly on real losses side. Second was the strategy and plan for execution, which included advanced pressure reduction and control, rehabilitation and monitoring of all district metered areas with data loggers, replacement of defective service connections and removal of inactive connections, the use of improved materials, especially for service connections, active leak detection and repair, large meter replacement, SCADA, that's supervisory control and data acquisition system, and NetBase, which is a related system developed by the contractor for effective operation monitoring. And then the third phase, of course, is maintenance of low NRW. NRW is pretty relatively easy if you look at the two sides to take down. The challenge on NRW is to keep it down. And quite remarkably, the result exceeded the target, which was very good. But this was largely because of the adjustment in the baseline. The baseline ended up being a higher volume. And comparatively, the results, if you look at it compared to a conventional contract, this performance-based contract cost was around 83 million. And if it would have been done by conventional system, would have been 50 million. The total benefit using the PBC ended up being 174 million. compared to a conventional intervention, which would have been 97 million. The cost-benefit ratio being 2.1 for the PBC as opposed to 1.9 for conventional intervention. So we could see, and I could give you some more numbers, you could see that the PBC approach is a much better approach than the conventional approach. However, the challenge on the PB side has been the theme throughout this conference, as I've been sitting in, is a matter of data collection and data accuracy, the confidence in the data. And that is where much of our water utilities are having a major challenge in putting together performance-based contracts and taking it to the market. So I'll stop there for now, except to say that all of this information on the Bahamas, the IDB is quite proud of this intervention and was captured in a technical note, IDB technical note TN number 813. I could share this with you all. So I'll stop there and we could chat in the questions and answers. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Evan. Those were three excellent presentations on three very different projects, and all of which in their own way have really provided benefits both to the utilities and the users and the governments. I mean, reduction in non-revenue water is a no-brainer. You're producing water, you're transporting it, you're purifying it, and you're pouring 50% of it literally down the drain. I'd like to introduce now Ms. Giselle Small, who is the director of the P3 unit in the Tobago House of Assembly. Of course, Trinidad and Tobago is the sovereign country. I may say that the Tobago House of Assembly has really gone ahead with a detailed PPP policy and has established a PPP unit, which is headed by Giselle. So maybe this is the case of the tail wagging the dog, and maybe you could show them across in Port of Spain how it's done. So Giselle, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. And on behalf of the Tobago House of Assembly, I'd like to extend my deepest appreciation to Brian and the various organizing bodies for the invitation and your continued support of Tobago's PPP program. I would say the IP3 unit currently serves as a delivery unit for the Tobago House of Assembly, managing the PPP pipeline promotion and implementation. And our first project, or pilot project, I would say, the Chauvin Integrated Housing Development. The THA is aiming to improve the quality of life of the residents through the provision of affordable housing that caters to the needs of low and middle income households, as outlined in our comprehensive economic development plan. The Division of Settlements, Urban Renewal and Public Utilities, which is responsible for housing in Tobago, has historically used traditional procurement and financing for its execution of development projects. And while the division has been able to deliver subsidized housing, the rate of delivery has been plagued by persistent challenges. This has largely resulted in delays due to insufficient funding, contractor incapability, and of course, ineffective project management. Moreover, there's an increasing imbalance between the demand for housing and the rate of delivery. In June of 2013, the Settlements Department indicated there were about 5,000 applications submitted. To date, that database is just over 7,000. And in order for the division to attempt to mitigate some of these challenges, the PPP modality is being considered. So the Assembly and the division has pledged to facilitate the development of housing solutions for approximately 4,000 citizens over the next 10 years. And in an effort to achieve this mandate, they are working with the Division of Finance's IP3 unit to provide approximately 250 affordable housing units with ancillary community and commercial facilities and requisite green spaces on about 45 acres of land on the Chauvin estate in Tobago. For this, the division is seeking an investor to design, finance, and construct the development, as well as oversee the operations and maintenance of the communal spaces and commercial facilities for a period of approximately 15 to 20 years. The Assembly currently estimates that capital costs of this project could range between 220 million and 300 million TT, or 32.2 to 43.9 million US dollars. Homeowners typically finance their houses through mortgages provided by the Trans-Vigo Mortgage Finance Company, with overall costs being supplemented by an assembly subsidy. An availability payment will be made by the assembly for the communal spaces, and the developer will be allowed to retain the rental income earned from commercial spaces. The assembly will also provide the land for the development, as well as a database of pre-qualified applicants for the units, and has established a stakeholder coordinating committee comprising stakeholders along the statutory approval chain to minimize any institutional delays and keep the project as close to agreed upon timelines as possible. So the integrated housing development will be managed by the IP3 unit and include the Division of Settlements and relevant advisors. We currently have Robinson Global Management working with the unit on our procurement and transaction advisory administrative developments, but the tenders for our external advisors are expected to go live by the end of Q1, and hopefully RFQs are scheduled for Q3 of this year. The design and construction period is estimated at 24 to 36 months, with, of course, the operations and maintenance period at 15 to 20 years. I know Brian had some initial questions, so I'll stop there so he can get to that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You may be the new kid on the block, but you're not short of ambition. And congratulations to yourself in leading your unit, and also to the THA for their policy directive. Ivan, if I could just ask you a question. What was my question again? Now, a controversial subject in Jamaica a few years ago, of course, was the issue of unsolicited proposals. And, as we know, in the first phase of your highway program, it was an international tender won by Bouygues and Vinci, who had the rights of the first refusal on the North-South link. Now, the North-South link has much less traffic than the Kingston to Portmore highway. The Chinese came in. You could say that the Chinese in Jamaica are an elephant on the road, in that they have done a lot of contracts and so on. How did you justify the difference in procurement approach between the first phase open tender and the second phase unsolicited proposal? Evan,
thanks,
you to mute, please. Evan, I think you need to mute.
Oh.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so as you said, what we call the north-south link of the highway, which connects the south coast to the north coast, was actually part of the original concession agreement. So the original east-west concession agreement had an option where the developer could exercise the option to build this section. But as you said, because of the traffic levels, it wasn't a viable proposition. The traffic by itself would never pay for the investment. And we had done models of the North-South highway over a period of time. So we also understood what the projected traffic levels were likely to be. And we also therefore understood the kind of subsidy that the government of Jamaica would have had to make had we done it in a traditional way. And so that was the argument to put forward, that it was not going to be done in a traditional manner. No one was going to come and build this highway without the government providing 200, 300, 400 million of subsidy for the project. And therefore we had to find another way. As I said, we started having some discussions with the Chinese about how we could do this project. And obviously also there was a contingent liability issue as well, because the project is so big. The government didn't want to have any contingent liabilities associated with the project. And so out of this came the discussion about how else can we facilitate growing traffic on the highway? Is there another way to get traffic to grow? Because obviously if traffic grows, then the project becomes more and more viable. So we started looking at lands along the highway, which would then become a win-win for both the government and for Czech. If the lands were developed, it would obviously be beneficial, generating jobs, investments, especially in terms of hotels as well. We had a number of hotel sites. So at the end, we agreed to provide these lands to check for the development of hotels on the North Coast. The right at the end of the highway is outrageous. So we had some land there for development of hotels. Along the highway, we have lands for commercial development. And so that became the justification. How do we get it done? And so it worked. We started, and it's now 4 years in the making, 5 years since we've completed the project.
Excellent. Well, you know, my wife, who's Jamaican, and I'm kind of a bit Jamaican as well, I had to assure her that the lands for development by check did not include one of her favorite places on the world, which is Laughing Waters.
She was the only one, Brian.
Yeah. I'd like to toss a question your way, Evan. I think non-revenue water as an economic project is a slam dunk. It's a no-brainer. I mean, you're reducing non-revenues from north of 50% to south of 25%. As you say, it has worked in the New Providence and so on. Do you have plans to replicate this throughout the islands? Because we all need it. Every island needs it. So do you have?
Of course,
to replicate?
Absolutely. The challenge is deep because it mixes the governance situation of water utilities that are government owned with the financial needs. And our water utilities being government owned is liable to the vagaries of political changes, if you will. Whereas governments are now touting that the private sector should be called in, as the example of the Bahamas, as well as we're doing NRW reduction here in Kingston and St. Andrew, is showing. The need for validation of data. Well, first of all, you have to put the strategy and the data together, and that is in itself is a challenge. I did not explain the history behind getting to the NRW PBC in the Bahamas, and Jamaica has a similar history. It had taken years to put together the request for proposals with the baseline, and then those baselines would be challenged by the competing interested contractors. And indeed, for the Jamaica case, there was a clause whereby if there could be no agreement between the NWC, National Water Commission, and the contractor, that they could walk away without any liability. We have done the IDB under my leadership. We over 2020 done non-revenue water reduction training because of the importance of this issue. And in that training, we found that the water utilities largely don't have high confidence in their water balance. So developing investment grade projects, whereas the potential is there, would take some time. We, the IDB, we are encouraging water utilities, the governments, to take up some of our grants that could be used to help us fashion these investment grade type investments, but they hesitate to commit to any kind of investment thereafter. It's a catch-22 situation, and we're doing everything that we can to demonstrate the viability. As part of the training, we've done non-revenue water financial modeling to demonstrate that such projects, and in the case of Bahamas, it is a 9-year payback. IDB loan to sovereign guarantee loan is 25 years. So we're trying to demonstrate to governments that these are projects, dealing with non-revenue water would be projects that in relatively short time could pay for itself. And if you have the proper tariff structure and those kinds of things, it could indeed provide for transformation of the utility. But at the core of it still is that water utilities don't have the autonomy to make decisions because the decision makers, the owners, is the state. And then they have this political gamemanship that is a reality. But we're trying to work through it.
Thank you very much, Evan. Finally, and quickly, just one final question for Michelle. Of course, aviation has been in the crosshairs of the COVID pandemic, and what impact has this had on the Barbados Airport transaction?
Thank you, Brian. In terms of the transaction, I think for us, we're excited that it has not dampened investor interest because we're still seeing strong interest in the transaction. What it means, however, is that we obviously have to restructure certain elements of the transaction. And we are very sensitive to the period in which we're expecting traffic recovery, because if you look at forecasts on aviation recovery, you're looking at a rebound of traffic that could be anywhere between sort of 2024 to 2025 before you see a return to pre-COVID-19 levels. So, you know, as we look at aviation and looking at doing transactions in the sector, it means updating revenue and traffic forecasts. It also means looking very much at the risk allocation and ensuring that, you know, we align a lot of the risks, a lot of the structuring issues around traffic, because that's the key risk that's facing investors right now. So, you know, in the case of Barbados, what we've done is look, for example, at the structure of the concession fee, so that, again, you have a differentiated concession fee during a traffic recovery period, and then, you know, the potential to step up thereafter once traffic recovers. Mandatory capex, for example, you know, expansionary capex now in this environment is not prudent. And so what we've done is
maybe 15 minutes in the middle of a conference, I'm on a panel.
Yes, sorry. And so, yes, so what we have is deferral of capex, and then capex being triggered by demand or in terms of capacity requirements. Similarly, as well, as we look at it, you know, what COVID has taught us is the challenges with uncertainty, because we could not have foreseen a pandemic. And so very importantly, as we look at concession contracts going forward, the importance of a rebalancing clause, so that, you know, as we look at these types of contracts, they can adapt to future events which may happen, which are prolonged events, structural events, which change the nature of a transaction without the need for a renegotiation, because we would have built a mechanism into the contract with triggers in terms of what would trigger rebalancing and a compensatory mechanism depending on which party is affected. So we see, I mean, the future for aviation, in spite of the pandemic, still being strong investor interest, but looking very closely at how we reshape those transactions to ensure that they're still viable transactions and balanced transactions to be attractive to both parties.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Michelle, Ivan, Evan, and Giselle. I think that's been a very interesting presentation on 4 projects. 3 of them are, you know, completed and were successful, and we hope that your project, Giselle, has equal success, and we are confident that it will. Well, that was another excellent session. I don't know about you guys at home, but I'm really enjoying this, and I'm thinking that we're getting some really interesting some discussions and questions coming from the audience. So now we're going to transition to the next session. Whew, I need some more water. So our next session is going to be a MDB roundtable discussion, session 2, where we will have some interesting presentations from IFC, from IDB Invest, and from Caribbean Development Bank. Are we all here? Let's have a look. Oh. Okay, here we come. Hello, Gianfranco.
How are you?
I'm fine. Daniel Best, how are you?
I'm well. How are you doing, Brian?
I'm excellent. And Richard Cabello. There's 2 of my ex-bosses here.
You have to behave then.
Yeah.
Oh.
I don't know about you, Richard, but he never behaved when he was with me. So
It's not in my genes. Well, good morning, gentlemen. Good morning. So in this session, one thing we're going to do, we're going to ask each of the three of you in turn just to give a short sort of statement about why your organization is the best thing since sliced bread and what your offerings are to assist Caribbean governments in getting projects done. But before then, I want to sort of talk about the pipeline. Not the oil pipeline that Biden just canceled, but our Caribbean PPP pipeline. I'm going to try. I'm going to try and share a screen just to start this application window. Yes. So application window. Let me try here. Yeah. Here we are. All right. Are we seeing this? Are we seeing my little graph here? Okay.
Yes.
So. All right. So for years, for about 3 or 4 years while I was at CDB, and I've updated it since then, I tend to keep tabs on the Caribbean PPP pipeline. How many projects are in play at any one time? And I think that it's very interesting to see that there are currently 30 projects that I've identified, which are in one phase or the other of the PPP development and procurement cycle. I've tried to limit it to real projects, you know, not PowerPoint projects. I call PowerPoint projects where you get 4 points on a PowerPoint and that's all. These are projects that have legs, where there's been some kind of work done. There's been a feasibility study. There's been a business case. It's in play. It is actually being developed. Whether it is from the early stage project concept through to post-award and financial closing. So we see the elephant in the room is Jamaica, 16 projects, and we will be having a breakout session after this. There will be 2 breakout sessions, one about the Jamaica pipeline and the second breakout session about solar projects in Trinidad and the Bahamas. But this is followed by Trinidad, Bahamas, and so on. And most of the countries only have, one ongoing project at a time. If we look at the sectors, renewable energy, water, and transport, those are the big 3. That's the trifecta. 8 projects in each of those 3 sectors. 4 projects in the social sectors, including a housing project that Giselle Small is developing in Tobago, as well as a PPP correctional facility in Jamaica. And I'll be asking all of you who wants to finance a jail. And 2 projects in tourism, and those are cruise ship piers. And finally, if we look at projects by the phase, it's not unusual for projects to take a long time to move from one to the other. So we have 10 in the concept stage, 9 in business case, 2 in request for proposal, and interestingly, 9 projects in which the winning bidder has been announced, but financial close has not yet been achieved. So stop sharing. All right. So who is first up? Who is first up on this one? Sorry, give me a second. First of all, we would like to turn over to, oh Lord. Yeah, to Richard Cabello from IFC, who's going to give us a short presentation on IFC Transaction Advisory Services. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you again, Brian, and good morning to everyone. So just following on the comments from my colleagues, Elona and Michelle, our mission is to support governments in structuring and promotion and tendering of PPP projects. And we support governments through the different project life cycle. So from I would say an idea to actual bidding and successfully closing of the transaction. And we have different tools. I could mention experiences that we're doing right now with new governments in Latin America, coming to the PPP space. With assistance from the World Bank colleagues, we have help in the creation of the laws, the PPP unit that are essential to focus the government efforts in these areas. But we have also discussed a portfolio of potential projects, which ones make sense, which ones don't make sense. PPP is a useful tool, but has to be applied under certain conditions. It's not the solution for all your problems. So I think that early stage analysis of what is a potential project, a good understanding of governments of what is a PPP and what are they engaging in, and get their commitment to do a transaction is, I think, essential. So we do pre-analysis of projects. We dig into the cases that are most likely to be good prospects for PPP, and then we take the transactions into the bidding stage and structuring and all that. So we can support governments in all the different aspects until the projects go to fruition. And I would say that the most important part in our analysis is not only the project, it's also to make sure that the government clients understand the transaction before signing any mandate. What we don't want is surprises in the execution of the transactions. So we tend to discuss a lot before signing any mandate for the governments to be aware of what are the benefits, what are the risks of the transactions, and then get a commitment. Just to give you a sense of our numbers, on average, a transaction, our worldwide average of duration from mandate to actual signing of the contract with a selected bidder takes around 2 years. So we need a government commitment for 2 years to get the project done. And this is not an easy thing to do because governments also have several priorities. Things change, focus change. But without the government attention and commitment, it is difficult to get the projects to success. The other interesting number that I have is our success rate, meaning that the mandates that we sign and the mandates that get into closing fluctuates historically between 50 to 60%. That means that half of the projects die before getting to success. And I would say that out of those, 99% are because the government changed its mind. So that is for us essential for governments to keep committed to the transaction, to understand the transaction very well before going into tender. And of course, as all multilaterals, we try to provide funding for the transaction cost. We have several tools to do that. But I would say that our focus and our experience and what we are super focused in doing, and I would say sometimes people say is our single project, is to advise government during the transaction. And to do that, we act as a transaction lead, which means we provide a comprehensive service to the clients. We subcontract the lawyers, the technical people, the environmental, social, even communication experts to help going through the transaction in order to provide a comprehensive service to the client. And we are in charge of selecting all the best advisors, the TORs, the supervision of their work, the integration of all that work in a transaction structure. The international promotion is done by us directly, and also the assistance during the bidding stage. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Richard. Interesting that you mentioned that number of 50 to 60% non-completion ratio on the advisory mandates. Oh boy, do I remember that number. You know, you dedicate 2 years or 1 year of your life on a project, and then the government says, "Oh no, thanks you, we've changed our minds." Okay. So next, we have who's up next? Who's up next? Oh Lord, sorry, I'm sorry. Where am I? Next, we have Gianfranco Casarali, who is the Division Chief of the Infrastructure and Energy Division of IDB Invest. Thank you very much. Gianfranco, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Yes.
Yes, helping you. And
Thank you,
hearing you
Brian.
loud and clear.
Thank you, Richard, for joining, and Danielle for the invitation, everybody. And thank you for the audience. First, introduce myself. Thank you for introducing Brian. I'm the Division Chief of the Infrastructure and Energy Division at the IDB Invest. IDB Invest is the private sector arm of the IDB Group, and we are the equivalent of the IFC for the World Bank in a way. We are the sister institution. The IDB basically lends to governments. We lend to private sector companies. And several years ago, what the question is, I guess, how we support PPP schemes in the region. And broadly speaking, we have what we call ventanilla única, unique window, where we join efforts with our colleagues of the IDB in order to structure from engagement and preliminary assessment all the way to mandate of the all the way to signing of contracts. And IDB Invest from our side, we participate in that effort, providing our structuring skills in doing transactions with private sector clients, and with experience that we have developed in doing transactions with private sector clients. And the Caribbean is top priority for the bank, for the whole group. And I wake up thinking about Caribbean and go to bed thinking about Caribbean. And I think the reason of the concern and why we are so worried about the Caribbean is because precisely the lack of pipeline of the infrastructure projects. We have a lot of eager to lend and to finance the transactions, but we are anxious to see the pipeline moving. And I think in part there are many complexities to develop a transaction, but in part is because we believe that still governments need a hand in order to structure transactions and in order to go over the challenges that in order to take one transaction from the conceptual stage all the way to awarding the contract and then financing. I think Richard was just mentioning it takes on average 2 years from mandate to signing of the contract. And I would add another 2 years from signing of the contract to actual signing of the financing documents from the lenders, depending on the complexity of the transaction. Will take roughly a year, I would say, to add. And then depending on the transaction, you will see bricks on the ground probably for another year, 2 years and a half. So I think what is important to mention there is that from the concept of the PPP until you see the actual benefits for population, you might have roughly between 3 and 5 years, right? If everything goes smooth. And I think that reinforces and I fully agree with Richard here, the need to have a multi-government commitment. So sometimes the change of mind in terms of PPP contracts are naturally biased by the political cycles in the countries. So when governments decide to engage in a PPP program, they need to think that it will take probably more than one election cycle in order to see the benefit for populations in order to keep it going. So it has to be a country commitment, no a single political party or a single government commitment to execute these mandates. And complementing that, I think the challenges that we face in the Caribbean in general, I think the region, when we see the impacts of COVID and the impact on GDP growth, particularly in tourism, and the Caribbean has been brutal. Contraction of average of 9.9% of GDP for the Caribbean countries. When you think about that, and when you think about the fiscal impact of the countries, that's when the PPP start. We need to think about very careful about what is done under the PPP scheme and what is the fiscal impact that PPP have. This structure have on governments, and that's why we are going through a challenging period now through COVID. And hopefully, the thing will rebound. I think everybody is willing to travel to at least on vacation. I think we are getting used to do this virtual conference by by Skype and these applications, but I think everybody is willing to travel for tourism, and hopefully that will rebound very quickly in the Caribbean, and we might see more appetite from governments to move forward through this Ppp scheme with a probably stronger, hopefully, fiscal position. And that's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Gianfranco. Very interesting, and it's always good to hear, what the multilaterals have that's available to be used by governments in the region. Now, in 1975, when I graduated from UWI with a bachelor's in economics, I'm going to change the world. And the first letter I wrote, the first job I applied for was Caribbean Development Bank. I don't think I got an answer, but 40 years later, it really was my pleasure to finally work with CDB. And I was 5 years working with our next guest, last but by no means least, Daniel Best, who is the head of the projects department within CDB. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you to Canada and the World Bank for the invitation. And also welcome, of course, to Richard and Gianfranco. Brian, admittedly, I want to say that CDB came to the PPP space a bit later than our MDB counterparts. Within the projects department at the bank, we are responsible for investment lending to all of our board member countries. And for those who may not be familiar with it, our board member countries essentially entails the English-speaking Caribbean, and then Haiti and Suriname. So we span from as far north as Bahamas, to as far south as Suriname and Guyana, and as far west as Belize and east as Barbados. But in 2014, and I want to jump off on the point that Jean made at the end there with respect to the dearth of pipeline within the Caribbean. Back in 2014, we did a study, PPP in the Caribbean, building on early lessons. You would be very familiar with that, Brian, I imagine. And some of the findings there informed how we would approach the PPP space. We realized that PPPs for many of our board member countries represented a pain point. There was lack of capacity, lack of technical skill. You coined the phrase which we have adopted. Many of our board member countries, unfortunately, went down the path of some PowerPoint projects, wherein without any real preparation, governments were committed to interventions and initiatives which weren't properly prepared and for which they didn't fully grasp or appreciate the long-term consequences on the debt overhang of the country. And so in 2015, we established, together with the World Bank and the IDB, the Regional PPP Support Mechanism, or RSM. And through that, our focus was essentially to upskill our borrowing member countries as it relates to this PPP animal, so to speak. So we provided support and assistance in areas of policy formulation. We assisted 4 of our board member countries. I think approximately today, 7 of our board member countries actually have mature PPP policies. We assisted 4 of them in Guyana, Belize, St. Lucia, and Bahamas, I think it was, in developing robust PPP policies to inform how they will operate in this space. Further to that, we went on a path of capacity building. And as such, again, together with our MDB partners, we held PPP boot camps, which saw approximately 50 or just about 48 of our key officers in our key public sector officers across 17 of our board member countries attending these boot camps and receiving training in how they should treat with PPPs. Further to that, we also, of course, developed the Caribbean PPP Toolkit, which is an online, readily accessible resource for our board member countries. And then we supported early formulation, pre-feasibility study for some of the PPP projects that were coming forward, some of which have actually moved to the next stage within your pipeline, which I'm sure we're going to come back to. So I share Jean's concern as it relates to the PPP pipeline within the region. Admittedly, Jamaica has done very well, and is certainly the poster child for PPPs within our region. However, given the impact of COVID and certainly the adverse impact it's had on government revenues, where we've seen most of our borrowing member countries having, without much preparation, having to fund a parallel healthcare system to support the response to COVID. It has invariably diverted resources away from infrastructure interventions, and as such, the PPP tool will come to the fore perhaps a little more fulsomely, and in so doing, it will be very important for our member countries to be prepared, to be appropriately trained and skilled in this space, and that is where CDB has been providing support to our borrowing member countries. So this is on the upside, on the initiation, as I mentioned, the training, and even the pre-feasibility. And I want to just stress on the pre-feasibility because, as I mentioned, given that we came a little late to the party, coming in at pre-feasibility stage affords us the opportunity to incorporate some of the safeguards which are critical to the development mandate of the bank. So we have been able, of course, in discussion and in supporting, providing funding for these initiatives to ensure that climate finance. I saw a comment earlier from one of the participants asking, what about climate change? So coming in early at that pre-feasibility stage, we ensure that, of course, climate considerations, environmental considerations, and even social, such as gender impacts, could be, as far as is possible, incorporated into project development. And then we tend to come in then at the latter stage, where we have been in discussions with our borrowing member countries and with many of the initiatives presented here in your pipeline to provide funding for at the capital work stage, of course, following our due diligence process. So we are also, I should mention, in the process of revamping our private sector division. So these are exciting times for us, and we expect to do quite a bit more as it relates to PPPs within our region. I'd stop there for now. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Gianfranco, and thank you, Richard. 3 excellent presentations. You know, the MDB gang is alive and well, and it's good to see cooperation. Now, we often talk about cooperation, and I know that CDB has cooperative agreements with IFC and IDB, and I'm sure that IDB and IFC have cooperation agreements with themselves. If we could maybe perhaps focus a little bit on the pipeline, and I'm not putting you on the spot on any particular project, but you know, having a run through of these projects, is there anything that grabs your fancy? Are there any sectors that you particularly would be interested in? Any countries that you have priorities, and so on and so forth? And again, I'm going to reach back to that very interesting project in Jamaica, which we will get to later in the Jamaica pipeline about the correctional facility. The Jamaica prisons situation is pretty bad, and I think that it is a great idea to build a brand new purpose-built correctional facility. Over to you, Gianfranco. Is there anything in that pipeline that really gets you excited? And you say you wake up in the morning and you go to bed at night thinking of the Caribbean. So what projects do you dream about at night?
I think in general, we get excited with any type of transaction that happens in the Caribbean. We always say that the problem of infrastructure is not the lack of money, it's the lack of good projects to finance. So anything that is well structured and you have is credit worthy and the contracts are well structured in that sense, we will be jumping into those. So we are actively looking at the transaction of the airport in Barbados, the cruise terminal in Belize, the Trinidad and Tobago power plants, the Family Island solarization program of the Bahamas. So those are transactions that we see more close to be ready for financing. And I'm talking about the pipeline for execution of pipeline on the downstream phase in the Caribbean. Upstream, we are basically engaging with the Caribbean economies and countries on more capacity building activities. We are working with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, water supply systems. We're continuing to working also in capacity building activities with Jamaica, and particularly resilience activities. We are continue to work also with the Tobago and the House Assembly for the prioritization projects there as well. So there are several activities that that we are working together with our colleagues of the public sector side of the IDB group, so the IDB in the upstream phase. But in general, and also we are following very closely the development of in Suriname and Guyana with the oil discoveries there. We see that there might be a lot of opportunity for PPP scheme and a much needed influx of revenue for the government that might create a fiscal space to further expand the PPP programs. Now, but conceptually, I think, and when we talk about a lack of capacity of the Caribbean economies, I think we need to make sure that everybody understands that that lack of capacity is not unique to the Caribbean. Our stronger demand for capacity activities is coming from countries such as Colombia and Brazil, that they are pushing the agenda in certain aspects, and despite those are countries that have been developing PPP scheme for years. So it's not that the Caribbean economies are in a worse off position vis-a-vis other economies of the region. Yes, you could argue that vis-a-vis Brazilian economies they are, but they are not. It's not something that is so far away that it cannot catch up. And what I think is important is to reflect on how you accomplish that and how you build that capacity. And I want to bring the example of another small country, Uruguay, which in the 90s, basically, the citizens voted against the participation of private sector in utilities. So there was a lot of resistance for the participation of private sector companies in the infrastructure sector in general. But gradually then they awarded the concession of the airport, and they had a very good experience with that. And then they awarded contracts for energy, renewable energy through the public utility, and they became a success case study worldwide. And now we are about to close financing. We closed financing last year from the first education PPP program in Uruguay, and we are lining up several PPP programs for road, education, etc. So something that from the outside, you will look at private sector participation in education was like the cutting edge of the PPP scheme. Uruguay has embraced it. And I think the concept, what I want to share with that, is that we need success stories. We need one project, well-structured, that can create a huge demonstration effect across the islands in the Caribbean. And when the government can see that and the population can benefit from that success story, I think that's when we will see the pipeline picking up. And probably that if you hear some resistance, the resistance will go down much more, and it will facilitate further developments in those transactions. And that's what we are working. We're working to try to identify, and it's a 5-year process to make that success, I was just saying, from concept to execution on the ground of the project. And so it requires a lot of stamina to keep them moving the transaction until you get them to the finish line. And that's our goal. That's our goal as an institution, and that's how we collaborate between IDB Invest and IDB to make that happen.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gianfranco. Richard, if I could turn over to you, what type of projects, what projects keep you awake at night, wondering, salivating at the thought of getting finance out there?
Thank you. So a few reflections on the charts that you share. In terms of sectors, most of the sectors are the ones where we have particular expertise. So we're talking about transport, energy, water, waste. There's plenty of experience in those So we feel very strongly that we could add value if governments would like to take into fruition. Now, in terms of renewable energy, this took me to think about the issue of size that was mentioned before. You know, when we think about projects, probably the ones that I've seen in the Caribbean are on average probably 100 million less. But I've seen also very small projects where I don't know, maybe 20 million capex, less than that. In those cases, we will have to do a careful assessment on the value for money analysis on whether the PPP adds value. But in terms of renewable energy, I was thinking about how do we address the issue of size and reflecting on standardization of documents, which is something that we are doing in big economies like Colombia and Brazil. But I think worldwide, the IFC have also developed standard transactions that could be used in different countries with some standardization that would lower the transaction cost, which is one of the hurdles when you go to small transactions. So if we look at the Caribbean, and I see several going after renewable energy, meaning solar, one thought would be, why don't you try to have an effort at the regional level to have more standard documentation that could, in my view, would lower transaction costs, and probably in the marketplace, you will sell the concept of a regional market rather than individual transactions. But that's, again, a reflection of what I see. Things that I don't see, that I see in Latin America due to the pandemic, is health and telecoms. Obviously, not to solve the problem of COVID, because that's an emergency, and PPP, as I said, takes time. But it's something to think about. How do we improve the health system coming from the pandemic and avoid this kind of situations in the future? So some governments have focused their investment in the health sector, and then my proposal here is, why don't you analyze PPP as an alternative to public works? Probably you will use your scarce resources in a much more efficient manner with a significant impact. And the other one is telecom, as somebody mentioned before. The pandemic has, make us work from home and all that. And some countries are thinking about how to reduce the, first, to expand the service, and second, to reduce the cost. So we have seen some projects. We have one now in Colombia where the government is trying to create a PPP for a backbone that will allow internet providers to use this facility and to provide the service to less commercial areas. But that's another thought. And then the other reflection is, the concentration in Jamaica is astounding that so many projects coming from there. Probably this is a reflection of all the efforts that the government has put into the PPP space, institutional arrangement, the capacity building, investment in pipeline development. All that takes time, but at the end provides results. And last, one thing that I noticed is so many number of projects in post-awarding. That's a number that caught my attention. I don't know what are the reasons, but I've seen those problems in other parts of Latin America, where sometimes it's due to probably lengthy negotiations with the preferred bidder. When we did the transaction in Jamaica, we use a different methodology that has some pros and cons, as everything in the world. And we use a pre-negotiation of the contract, which took more effort from the government and the transaction advisors. but at the end facilitated the signing of the contract with the selected bidder, and we didn't have to go in through lengthy negotiation post-awarding. Then the other issue that we have observed in other countries is that, you know, when you don't do your homework pre-tendering, you pay the price post-tendering. And there is where all the surprises come, and that affects closings or financial closing or the implementation of the project. So any money that you invest in preparation is well invested, and will avoid you problems in the future. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much, Richard. We have a question from the audience from Albert Gillings. Hi, Albert. And Albert is asking, I'm going to ignore the thing about political ideologies, but what does success in a PPP project look like, and how do we monitor that? Perhaps I'll turn that one over to Giancarlo. How would you describe a successful PPP project? You're muted, Giancarlo. Gianfranco. That's better. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I have a coughing. I'm coughing. That's why I'm muting. I don't have COVID, but I'm coughing. I think a successful PPP program will probably, we might have different views about what it means, but at least it needs to start with the fact that at some point it needs to be built, the project. So it needs to go through the whole process of being awarded, being eligible for financing for lenders, have the attraction of equity players in the market, and getting the project done. So it needs to go through the whole process. But most importantly, I think it needs to be accepted by the population, that the project is fiscally responsible, it is financially sustainable, it's environmentally and socially sustainable. So it has these all elements that we all multilateral institutions focus on when we get the transactions done. Now, projects that get to that mean they become very successful, and they become the poster child for transactions that can replicate. And for me, it's not surprising to see a pipeline in Jamaica so big, because they are the countries in the other country in the Caribbean that have developed the most. The container terminal, the Trans-Jamaica Highway, those are transactions that now they are suffering probably because of the crisis, but they are transactions that got to the finish line, were financed, and they're in operation, and people are enjoying the benefits from that. So, and Project Jamaica is building over that success in order to further develop the pipeline for the future. And I think that's important, and that's what we have seen in many countries. I mentioned Uruguay to bring it outside the Caribbean. We are seeing now in Paraguay. Paraguay, for historical no presence of private sector participation in Paraguay. We closed the financing for routes 2 and 7, and now we are starting to see the pipeline for PPP picking up because it was successful transaction. But as I mentioned, I think successful can be many things, but it has to be at the end, it has to be a lot of things at the same time. Because if you are weak, if you have a perfect transaction that gets financial closing, but it has huge social impacts and people cannot afford the services, then it becomes problematic at the very end, and then it will be tainted, not only the project, but it will tainted the concept of PPP, and that's when you have starting to have the problems. And then we have to see government retracting from the idea and going back to public works and using money for public works instead of for hospitals or social programs where the money is most needed.
Thank you very much, Gianfranco. Excellent. Yes, I was coming to end with you. I have to end with Dan.
No, hey. You know, I was going to jump back to the earlier question about, you know, what keeps me up at night thinking about this pipeline. But before I go there, in response to the question from Albert Gillings, and I think Gianfranco really nailed it. You know, a PPP project is still a project, and the unit of development is still the citizen. If the project doesn't advance the lives and livelihoods of the citizenry, whichever respective country it is, then can it really be considered successful? I think absolutely the financial benefits to the country are significant, but the citizenry has to buy in to it, and I think that is it needs to be the signpost, because as you said, if at the end of the day your residents and citizens don't buy into whatever this initiative is, then it's not going to be used, and essentially will be considered a failure. I want to, in responding to your first point, your question, sorry, about what excites me about this pipeline, you would permit me to quote you again, Brian. When you were here, we were having a conversation, and you said about CDB that the Caribbean is not only our home; it is our only home. This is where we exist as a bank in the region. And when I consider the region, the two things that jump out at me certainly would be energy security and non-revenue water. And projects that have a positive impact in moving the needle in these two spaces, I think need to be our focus. And of course, wrapped up in there would be the ever-present overarching issue of climate change, building climate resilience into all of these initiatives. So, for instance, when we consider from your pipeline, the renewable energy projects, and particularly the geothermal project, as you know, we have been involved in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and in a PPP venture there. But also what we've been able to do in collaboration with ADB and the GeoSmart facility is to seek to de-risk the investment into the project by supporting the early stage exploration to prove the resource. As we know, developers seeking to get commercial funding for this is very, very expensive and prohibitive. And so we have concessional resources that we have been using to seek to de-risk geothermal interventions. So certainly the renewable energy projects, solar interventions as well, but also the non-revenue water and water projects across the board. I think you nailed it in the previous presentation, where we said we can't, on average, the non-revenue water in the region is fast approaching 50%, and we can't continue to produce twice as much water as is consumed. And as such, when I consider, for instance, the Rio Cobre water supply system scheme, which we are in discussions with Jamaica on and NWC on, to actually finance, build, and operate a standalone treatment plant in that space. I think these are exciting initiatives which CDB would be happy to line up with. We also, of course, we are a small institution and have to consider exposure risk, as you'll be acutely familiar with. And so countries such as Jamaica, Cayman, most of the countries that you have on the list here, St. Kitts and Nevis, where we are in active discussions with supporting them on their geothermal energy project, as I mentioned, Bahamas, and of course Trinidad and Tobago, where we are very keen to do business in that space and support them. We, as you know, we supported the pre-feasibility for the Tobago low-income housing project, which is moving forward. That is one of our early babies, so to speak, and it's gone on and it's going on to do some good things. And as such, the Trinidad and Tobago market is one where we certainly aren't exposed and would be keen to do some work there.
Okay.
I'd stop there for now. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much. And I think those are fitting last words from Daniel. Thank you very much to all our panelists. I think that was a very interesting presentation. Whew.
Thank you very much.
So now we're transitioning to another session. This will be the breakout sessions. So what we have is two sessions which are coming up now. One, which is on this main platform, is the breakout session for the Jamaica PPP pipeline, where we will be having presentations from the Development Bank of Jamaica on their 15 projects, which are currently in process. And then the other one, which I think you will have to then go out to, as you'll see the sign just underneath my name there, Solar PPP breakout session. That if you want to go to that one, then that will be a parallel breakout session on two very interesting solar projects. One is the Family Island solarization in the Bahamas, and then the other one is Trinidad Solar. So I will be staying on this session. So anybody who wants to go to the solarization session, please do so now. And please remember, if you're going to the solarization, to turn down the volume on the Crowdcast platform by going to the bottom of the screen, so that you don't have to close out the browser. I don't know if Andrew, if you want to just come in here with some technical guidance.
Yeah, so as long as people have, you can turn off the volume or mute the browser tab that you have open when you jump into the other breakout. Just leave this one open though, as we'll be returning to this one at the end.
Okay.
And then, Nicola, are you going to share your screen now with the presentation?
All right, so on this here, in this room, we're going to be featuring a presentation from the Development Bank of Jamaica. And Nicola Russell is welcome back. As we said, Jamaica has done very well in its development of its PPP program and has an active pipeline. I might say that this pipeline that you're going to see now is not all the projects that Jamaica has currently in the development stages. But otherwise, then to fill up the entire thing. So these are the top 15 projects which Jamaica is currently procuring. So Nicola, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. I'm just going to quickly go over the Jamaica's PPP and privatization program, because I want to leave as much time as possible for the presenters on the projects. So the PPP policy was approved and published in October 2012, and it was updated in December 2017. We've completed 5 PPP transactions. We've spoken about Norman Manley International Airport, Kingston Container Terminal, prior years North-South Highway, Highway 2000, Stansted International Airport. We've completed 25 privatizations between 2009 and 2020 in energy, tourism, logistics, agriculture, transport, and investment value of these is over US 1.7 billion. Jamaica is ranked 4th as at April 2019 in Infoscope ranking. Infoscope ranks 21 Latin American and Caribbean countries based on facilitation of private investment in infrastructure. A little bit about the role of DBJ. We do mainly 4 things. That's transaction management, project development, program monitoring and evaluation, capacity building, policy development, identification and management of funding for project preparation. And some of the transactions that we're working on now in PPPs, it's water and wastewater, energy, solid waste management, logistics, some of the privatizations in transport, energy, real estate, manufacturing, tourism, and agriculture. So I'm going to turn over now to some of the presenters. We're going to start with Glacier Cunningham from the National Water Commission on the Jamaican projects in the pipeline.
Morning, are you seeing me? Can you hear me? Hello? Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you, Glacier.
Yes, I'm hearing you loud and clear, Glacier.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nicola, for the introduction. My name is Glacier Cunningham. I'm the Vice President for Investment and Performance Monitoring at the NWC. I'm going to go through a couple of our projects that we have in the pipeline at the moment, but a brief introduction of the National Water Commission first. The NWC is a statutory body, and we're charged with the responsibility of being the main, but not the exclusive provider of potable water and sewage collection and treatment services in Jamaica. The NWC supplies about 75% of the population with piped water and operate about 1,000 water supply facilities and more than 11,000 kilometers of water mains. In terms of sewage, our island-wide coverage is about 24%, and we do that by operating some 68 wastewater treatment plants, about 100 pump stations, and over 500 kilometers of collector and trunk sewers. Although the NWC is a government-owned entity with wider economic and social objectives, it's been our mandate to operate as a commercially viable company. This is a challenge, as you can imagine, given the historical, operational, and financial issues we share with so many other water utilities in the region. In striving towards these dual mandates, though, the NWC has prepared a capital development program which seeks to, by 2030, develop and implement key projects to increase access to potable water to about 85%, and to increase wastewater coverage to about 50% island-wide. The projects I'll be presenting focus on the areas of non-revenue water, which we've heard quite a bit about this morning, and sewage treatment. And these are as follows. I'm not seeing the presentation move. Are you seeing, are you on my slide?
Yes, I'm on Northern Parishes. You're not seeing it up?
Not on my screen, but I'm hoping the audience is. I'm just seeing the cover.
Okay, are you seeing it now?
I'm still seeing the cover, unfortunately.
Let's stop sharing and come back.
Apologies for the technical difficulties. Hopefully we'll get it back up shortly. Right.
All right, there we go.
Nicola,
Okay.
can you make it full screen instead of just in the video itself? Make it go to full screen.
Yes, I've done it full screen. It's not showing full screen?
No, it's still showing the center view.
Okay.
All right, let me proceed. So the Northern Parishes NRW reduction project is the one we're furthest down the wicket with. A little explanation of what NRW is. Nationally, Jamaica, we estimate our non-revenue water to be about 74% of our production. And that means that our 26% of our production is 74% of our production is lost through water leaks, theft through illegal connections and meter bypasses, or from meter and billing errors. Non-revenue water, as you may know, is one of the lowest hanging fruits in order to improve the efficiency of water utilities around the world. The less drinking water a utility needs to treat and pump out of the network is the less energy the utility uses. And the less water lost to theft and leakage is the more water available for distribution to customers, and the greater the revenue available to the utility to carry out our expansion and improve service delivery to said customers. The enterprise has been long aware of the need to reduce NRW, and we've made several efforts to do so. Most recently, we're at the tail end of the KMA NRW reduction program, which involved the engagement of a non-revenue water specialist in a co-management approach. This was originally a 5-year performance-based contract worth about $45 million, and it was recently extended for 1 year due to the drought conditions and the COVID-19 pandemic experience started in 2020. More recently, we just started last year the Portmore NRW reduction program. It's a similar co-management approach worth $13 million, and the objective is the same, wherein we're trying to reduce NRW in the program area to a best practice of about 30% over 5 years. This project, the Northern Parishes NRW Reduction Program, operates in the parishes of Trelawney, St. Anne, and St. James, and was born from the fact that NWC is unable to satisfy all its customers along that corridor in the North Coast with continuous water supply. As a result of this insufficient supply, we fulfill our current demand by limiting the hours of pressurized service in some of these areas, which is not a happy condition to be in when you are in the business we're in. Over the next 5 to 6 years, one of the major measures to improve supply is implementation of a comprehensive NRW reduction program with the similar aim of losses to be reduced to not more than 30% by 2026. In this performance-based contract, it's envisaged that there will be installation of digital performance measurement system and instruments, such as meters and valves, at all our major distribution points in the system. Estimates of hours of service and consumption in the determined district metered zones, or DMZs, will be undertaken. And the contractor will pursue a number of commercial and physical intervention measures that will bring about reduction in NRW. As is implied by the term performance-based, the payment structure and compensation to the contractor will be linked to the reduction in NRW based on our set targets. The benefits we anticipate include increased water sales and additional revenue due to both physical and commercial loss reduction, and over time, an increased customer base on the basis of our ability to accommodate more residential, commercial, and tourism-related developments. The status currently is that the business case has been completed, and we will move to the next stage of procuring a contractor to undertake the works. The proposed budget for this project is about $35 million US. Next, we have the Soapberry wastewater treatment plant. I'm hoping that the presentation slide will move on your end. I don't know if anybody can confirm that it has.
It's not showing that it's moved. Nicola, can you open up the PowerPoint presentation itself out of the Crowdcast window and click on it to move forward?
Okay.
And just to let everyone know, technical glitches apart, that this presentation will be available afterwards to download from the event.
Are you seeing it now?
Well, maybe Glaister, if you could just run through the salient points while we try and get this technical glitch sorted. Thanks.
No problem, no problem. So in the area of sewage, one of our biggest projects next is the Soapberry wastewater treatment plant. The environmental and economic benefits of sewage treatment are well known, so I won't waste your time describing those, but you'll understand why expansion of sanitation coverage is a key strategic pillar for the NFC. The Soapberry treatment plant is the largest in the island and services the Kingston metropolitan area, which includes the urban centers of Kingston, St. Andrew, Southeast St. Catherine, and the Greater Spanish Town area, which account for a substantial percentage of the island's population. The plant and its associated sewage infrastructure are currently owned and operated by the Central Wastewater Treatment Company, or the CWTC, in which NWC has an 85% shareholding and the remaining 15% owned by the current operator. The existing facility is capable of serving about 256,000 persons, or a flow of 75,000 cubic meters per day. And the projected medium-term requirement is to serve approximately 500,000 persons. So in order to meet that requirement for treatment, it's proposed to double the capacity of the plant to about 150,000 cubic meters per day, and to expand the Ppsa sewer network, thereby providing the opportunity for development of more residential and commercial infrastructure throughout the area. The output from the plant will meet or exceed the National Environmental and Planning Agency's guidelines for effluent quality, and could provide opportunities for other uses of the effluent. We are envisioning, for example, use for irrigation of adjacent agricultural lands. The plant is intended as well to be climate change resilient, by the introduction of new technologies and renewable energy solutions, solar, for example, or wind. And the proposed budget for this project is approximately 85 million US dollars. In terms of this status, in December, we just completed a request for expressions of interest for advisory services, and the evaluation is now in process. Next in the pipeline is the Falmouth Centralized Sewage Project. Falmouth, for those who don't know, is the capital of the parish of Trelawney, which is located between the tourist resorts of Montego Bay and Ocho Rios on the north coast. Has a population of just under 9,000 residents and is one of Jamaica's fastest growing and newest tourist resorts, due in part to the recent port development, primarily for cruise ships, which has been a catalyst for social and economic activity in the town and its environs. The town's existing water supply, sewerage, and stormwater drainage systems will require expansion in order to support its economic development. And as such, a master plan is currently being prepared to inform the interventions to be undertaken. In terms of sewage specifically, the town and the surrounding residential developments are currently being served by various types of small packaged and mechanical wastewater treatment plants, which are in varying states of repair. So as such, it is our intention to engage a developer or consortium to finance, design, build, and operate a centralized sewage infrastructure and wastewater treatment facility to satisfy the current and long-term sewage needs for the town. The proposed works will entail the installation of street sewers in the sections of the towns that are not currently sewered, trunk sewers, force mains, and pumping stations to transfer wastewater to the facility itself and the facility itself. Sale of the wastewater treatment services will be through a wastewater treatment concession or agreement between the NWC and the SPV formed to perform these works. Proposed budget for this project is approximately 70 million US dollars. In terms of status and completion of the master plan, a business case will be developed to support the transaction. Turning our attention now to the South Coast, we have a number of projects in the pipeline, including the Southern Town Centralized Sewage Systems Project. And this is slated for the towns of Old Harbor, Santa Cruz, Maypen, Mandeville, and Spanish Town, which are the fastest growing towns and parish capitals on the south coast of the island. Similar to what obtains in the Falmouth project, the towns and their adjoining residential areas are currently being served by various small plants, and most are in need of upgrading. NWC plans to engage a developer under similar terms to that of Falmouth, and the proposed works will impact over 400,000 residents. It will, of course, due to the size of it, be approached in stages. In terms of status, we are currently procuring consultancy services for the master plan, followed by which we will move to the development of the business case. As I said, it's a very large project. The budget for the entire thing is about 500 million US dollars.
Sorry, Glaister, we're running a couple of minutes behind, so.
Last slide.
All right.
Finally, we have the Southern Towns NRW Reduction Program. It's similar in methodology to the Northern Coastal Project, but it will operate in the towns of Mandeville, Old Harbor, and Maypen. The impact is expected for about 260,000 residents and similar targets. Status for that is that the TORs are currently being prepared for the engagement of consultants to develop the master plan and business case, and the budget for that is approximately $75 million. I can stop there, as promised.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Glaister. And now we will go back to Ivan, I believe, who is going to give us a short presentation on the highway projects.
Hi, good morning again, everybody. You hear me? Right?
Yes, we're hearing you loud and clear. Over to you, Ivan.
Nicola, can you?
Sorry, you're seeing it?
No, Nicola, let me.
You want to do it? Okay.
Yeah, let me try on my side because
Okay.
it wasn't changing in the last presentation.
Okay.
Are you seeing it?
Yes, we're seeing and hearing loud and clear.
Has it changed? Brian or Nicola, has the slide changed?
Yes, it has. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks again, everybody, and good morning again. Thank you again, Brian. Thanks, Nicola. For those of you who don't know, NROC is the entity charged with the responsibility for implementing toll roads throughout the country. What I'll do today is to talk through a little bit about the existing structures that we have used. Some of it I talked about this morning, and how this has led us to where we are in terms of the evolution of what we're doing in terms of the main road network. So, for those of you who don't know Jamaica major tourism destinations are actually located on the northern coast of the country, Negril, through Montego Bay, through Ocho Rios, and through Port Antonio. And starting in about the mid-1990s, the government started with a project to improve the linkages between these tourism destinations. And so these projects were funded by the multilaterals, the IDB, the CDB, and the Japanese Bank for International Construction. Did these projects along the north coast. So about 270 kilometers of roadways was done as part of the project. These projects were also plagued by overruns. And so when we faced the similar challenges of how to develop the new roadway structures, especially around the tourism centers, especially around the major population centers, we started looking at how could we do public-private partnerships to improve the delivery of these projects. So the first project that we did was the East-West Highway, which starts from Kingston and goes to Maypen, including what we call the Portmore Causeway. This roadway is about 50 kilometers, and the investment at the time was about 340 million. We talked a little bit this morning about the North-South Highway, which was the second project which we did, which is again about 67 kilometers going from the south coast to the north coast. And currently we're actually implementing the east-west extension, going from Maypen all the way to Mandeville, which is a 28-kilometer project. So, as I said, in order to see where we're going or thinking in relation to the financing of the new project, I'll show you quickly how we finance the existing projects. So as I said, the first project was a traditional project. The GOJ provided about $99 million of funding, and that funding was subordinated to the loans of the developer, the commercial debt of the developer. The commercial debt up until about 2019 was from the multilateral banks, IDB, IFC, EIB, and Proparco. The risks associated with the project were, as I mentioned this morning, the revenue risk and the traffic risk were with the developer, whereas the government of Jamaica had certain contingent liabilities in relation to the loans from the multilateral banks. So that in the event that there was a termination of the contract for any reason, the developers would have gotten back, the lenders would have gotten back the loans. The second project, which we talked a little bit about this morning as well, at the time of implementing this in 2012, the government was not in a position to provide loans for the project. And so, as we talked about again this morning, we provided about 1,200 acres of land to the developer, China Harbor, funded by the Exim Bank of China. We provided a concession agreement of 50 years, and we removed some of the contingent liabilities associated with termination in the event of a developer's default. So we moved from projects funded by the GOJ to projects with significant subordinated loans by the GOJ to projects where the project was fully funded by the developer and the GOJ providing lands to allow the developer to build on these lands and to improve the traffic on the highway. As we talked a little bit about this morning as well, over the years, we in Jamaica have a particular feature of our toll roads, which requires that for every free road or for every toll road, there must be a free alternative road. And so over the years, as traffic began to grow on the free roads, more and more congestion started taking place on the free roads. So concessions like ours rely on obviously on congestion on the free roads. So the more congestion you have on the free roads, then traffic begins to migrate towards the toll roads. But obviously, this provides a dilemma for governments. We have, in this particular case, we have about 70,000 vehicles per day on the free roads and about 35,000, 40,000 vehicles per day on the toll roads. So the voices of the people on the free roads are obviously very loud. They want improvements in the free road. They don't want necessarily to move over onto the toll road. So the government decided to expand the free roads, and that then created an issue, obviously, for the concession, in that it required that compensation be paid to the developer. So we started to look at how we could remove this issue. We had an initial ownership structure, as we mentioned, with Bouygues, Vinci, IFC, and Proparco. We went out, we raised some bridge financing to buy back the shares from the existing owners of Trans Jamaica. We also raised some bridge financing to pay off the existing loans of Trans Jamaica, because the purchase of the shares from the shareholders of Trans Jamaica triggered an automatic repayment provision to repay the loans to the multilaterals. So we borrowed about $220 million in bridge financing to deal with both the purchasing of the shares and the repayment of the existing loans. And then, as I said, we went to the market to do an IPO to raise funding in order to repay the loan, the bridge financing that we had taken to purchase the shares. Once that was concluded, we then went to the US bond market to then seek funds to then repay the bridge financing, because we now had bridge financing for the existing multilateral loans that we had repaid, and we issued about $220 million US of bonds in the US market to then repay those bridge financing. So with that, we then had a almost new concession agreement without the competing roads provisions in the structure which that existed before, with reduced contingent liabilities for the government of Jamaica in relation to termination risk, and also with significantly reduced interest rates, because actually, as part of this whole transaction, we were able to reduce the interest rate from the multilaterals by about 30%. So before the transaction, our interest rates were about 9.4%. With the transaction, we went down to about 5.75% in terms of the loans.
Sorry to cut you, Ivan, but time is getting tight.
All right. So as you can imagine, the challenge we have is that a lot of the corridors that we have developed have now exceeded the capacity on the existing roads. And so now what we're doing is seeking to implement new projects which will solve this capacity problem on the North Coast primarily. The first major project that we're looking at is what we call our Montego Bay Bypass project. That project is a 15-kilometer roadway which goes around our second largest city in Montego Bay. It's 15 kilometers around Montego Bay plus a spur which goes down towards the south coast of Jamaica, a project of about 314 million. We've done fairly detailed traffic analysis along the road, along the potential road. We've looked at what the tolls are likely to be, about 1.38 million. We looked at what the revenues are likely to be, about 5.2 million, growing to about 10 million US by about 2049. We've completed a feasibility assessment, and we're now in the process of acquiring the parcels for the road. The structure that we're looking at is one in which the GOJ is expected to finance the construction of the project, and once the project is completed, then to look for a developer who will provide a concession fee to cover the investment in the project at that stage. The second project is new for us, where we're looking now at projects which don't have user pay, where the government will have to find the resources to pay for the project over a period of time. And so we're looking at a number of different options, shadow tolls, looking at annuity payments and availability of payments. This package of projects is about 59 kilometers of roadways, valued at about 490 million. And those are the two projects that we wanted to talk about. Thank you, Brian.
Excellent. Well, there's some really exciting projects there, and congratulations to yourself and your team at NROC, and of course the entire government team on those two exciting projects. And now we're going to end the Jamaica pipeline presentation with some words from Tanny Shirley, who provides some overview of the National Solid Waste Management Authority project to fix Riverton City, amongst others. So Tanny, over to you.
So we've got Tanny on screen, but no video from them yet.
Good morning.
We can hear you, Tanny.
Okay, I'm not seeing myself on screen, but are you hearing me clearly?
Yes, Tanny, we're hearing you loud and clear. We're not seeing you, but we're hearing you.
Okay. Good morning to the moderator and the rest of the panelists, and of course those watching on. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this webinar. Let me give you a little background and overview on the National Solid Waste Divestment PPP project. As you are seeing, Jamaica's waste stream is presently at approximately 830,000 tons per year. Unfortunately, only a percentage of this waste is collected by the National Solid Waste Management Authority, while a significant portion is disposed of in a manner that is definitely not environmentally acceptable. Consequent to this, the government of Jamaica, via the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development, has undertaken the process of developing an integrated solid waste management PPP project to reform and manage the country's waste stream. I will now turn to slide 4, where I will point out the plethora of opportunities and benefits to be derived from the project. And certainly the objectives now are to achieve the following: leverage of private sector capital, reduce government expenditure, which presently gives very little return on such expenditures, to use waste energy as a revenue stream to support the effective management of the waste system, to leverage expertise in facilitating the establishment of a sustainable, socially and environmentally friendly integrated solid waste management system, to develop recycling and renewable energy capacity from our resources, to improve the delivery of waste management services, to facilitate improved regulation and enforcement in waste management industry, which would allow the national solid waste to be transitioned into a regulatory body as opposed to its present responsibility as an operator. To develop environmentally friendly, low footprint sanitary landfills across the country, as opposed to large parcels of land with dumping sites. To use the opportunity to close the Riverton landfill, which now represents approximately 55 to 60% of our total waste collection. The Riverton landfill has exhausted its time and is presently a costly environmental hazard to the country. So now we are looking at freeing up approximately 100 acres of prime real estate land at the Riverton site that can now be returned for more effective commercial use to benefit the community, which is highly populated, and the country in a more diverse way. To develop technical skill sets in the workforce to support advanced technology in the waste conversion. To eliminate severe health hazards that so many Jamaicans have been exposed to due to improper waste management at dumping sites. And I would say finally a big one is to reduce our recurrent health bills due to repetitive hospital visits by residents due to the effect of pollution as a result of fires from time to time from the dumping site. The initial recommendation, as seen in slide 5, is for a single private operator who would design, finance, build, own, operate, and transfer concessions for the operation of the island waste collection over a period of, say, 20 to 30 years. Emphasis will be placed on 4 pillars: technology, social, financial, and environmental, of course, using waste conversion to energy as mandated by the government. The enterprise team has examined all the options and believes that a 40 megawatt waste energy plant would be most suited given our current and forecasted feedstock of waste. So now we turn to project development stages. We have implemented 3 different phases to facilitate the development. Phase 1, we had cabinet approval for the privatization and the appointment of an enterprise team. In phase 2, we focused on due diligence and business cases, where we conducted a siting study, Riverton closure plan, and post-PPP capacity assessment. And in phase 3, we have the pre-qualification of private sector bidders the competitive tender process and contract award. Our progress to date has seen the completion of pre-feasibility study, which was done in 2017. In 2018, we completed the commercial waste characterization study and got approval for the project budget. And that approval was from Cabinet. Let me haste to extend appreciation to the IDB, the World Bank, and IFC for their phenomenal support in helping to guide the process, as well as offering financial support to the various consultants required to execute the stages of the project. As we move to the next step, we will see beginning in March 2021, all the studies being assigned to facilitate a procurement launch by March of 2022. As you are seeing in slide 10, great emphasis is being placed on the key issues for business case and transaction structure. The investment opportunities are clearly defined, and I would say they are very attractive for any investor to buy into, particularly when you look at the untapped opportunities for waste management. In looking at the next three slides, which cover investment and untapped opportunities, as well as milestone schedule, I should hasten to say that two of the common questions I hear are, can waste to energy be environmentally friendly? Can it be financially viable using our present waste stock? Of course there are. There are several methods to look at waste conversion to energy. Each one of these solutions has specific characteristics and can be more or less environmentally friendly, depending on how we navigate the technology to be used. Mainly we tend to look at thermochemical conversion as opposed to biological conversion, due to faster results in achieving the byproduct of conversion. But I'm sure the various bidders will present their technology that would be most feasible to achieve the terms of reference mandated during the tender process. With today's technology using thermochemical conversion, we can easily get up to 100% emission-free results. The systems are built with excellent emission control mechanisms such as pulse jet fabric filters, wet and dry electrostatic precipitators, scrubbers, dust collectors, controlling what we call the fuel gases from combustion, such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, chlorine, mercury, and of course lead, to acceptable levels to make the process environmentally acceptable.
Sorry, Tansi, we're running a little bit on time.
And as it relates to funding, presently the National Solid Waste Management Authority is funded by the government to collect waste from the property tax budget. The government also collects revenue from commercial waste through a tipping fee on its collection side. Certainly, if the government is divesting its responsibility of managing a waste system, then it would be reasonable to believe that the funds present used to carry out this responsibility would then be handed over to the PPP without any further cost to the taxpayer. The question, however, is how much of that fund will be reasonably required from the investors to run an efficient and effective operation. Certainly, this is where the competitive bidding would come in when we go to tender. This is where effective use of private sector management, operational controls, technology will dictate a more cost-effective operation. Secondly, there will be additional revenues coming in to support the PPP from waste to energy conversion and its byproducts, which the investor would be guaranteed a carriage of such energy to support the country's energy grid. We believe that those resources should be quite adequate to fund our waste management system. And with that, I believe my 10 minutes are up, and I'm so excited about this project, I could go on for another 10 minutes. So thank you all for listening, and I await questions from the our audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. Just a very short thing. I once had a tour of the Durban landfill, which is an aromatic experience. And they handed out caps that said "Born to Landfill," which they took from the cartoon movie Born to Kill. Anyway, just a brief question that came in. I would like to just pose this very briefly to Ivan. And the question is, why is GOJ financing the MDJ bypass construction? Would a design, build, finance, operate, and maintain model not be preferable? And I think somebody has their microphone on, which needs to be muted, please, or something.
Right. So the Montego bypass, based on the traffic, again, similar to what we experienced with the north-south alignment, the traffic numbers will not support a concession where the developer is fully responsible for covering the investment in a project. And so we had to find a way to reduce the investment capital that will be required from the developer. So again, we're doing something which we have not done before. We're using very, very low-cost funds to implement the project. Obviously, sometimes low-cost funds come with contractors, and so we have contractors that we're committed to using. And so the idea is to develop the project using the low-cost funds from the GOJ, implement the project, and then once the construction is completed for that section of the project, to then move on to having a developer come on board. At that point, the government of Jamaica will then be able to recover some of the investment that they've made for the project, and also reduce the risks associated with the developer from implementing the project. So that's the rationale for the Montego bypass and how we're treating with it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ivan. That's very interesting. I think what this last session has showed, and in fact what the whole morning has showed, can be summed up in one word: solid. We have a solid pipeline. We have solid help and solid support available from the multilateral development banks. And as we have just seen, we have solid project teams from the governments who are promoting these projects. So my congratulations to everybody who has participated and presented this morning. Thank you all for your fascinating questions from the audience and the presentations from the speakers. And in the beginning, there was Jason. And in the end, there will be Jason. So I will now hand over to Jason Liu for some closing remarks. Thank you all very much. Jason, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Brian. You did a wonderful job moderating today's sessions. I really appreciate that. Thank you. This brings us to the end of today's webinar. I wish we had more time to continue the discussions, but at least I hope you all agree with me that all the sessions are very interesting, informative, and insightful. Thank you to our distinguished guests, speakers, presenters, and participants. We are very glad that you could join us to share and learn more about the unique opportunities to scale private investment in low carbon, resilient, and inclusive infrastructure in the Caribbean. We learned about some of the unique challenges that the region is facing and what the role governments and MDBs can play to build a well-structured, bankable, and resilient infrastructure PPPs capable of mobilizing private capital. Our multilateral development bank partners also highlighted the distinct roles they play across the PPP value chain to support infrastructure PPP development at each stage of the project life cycles. We also learned about the specific project opportunities in the Caribbean and what a key lesson learned and the best practice we can take from those experiences to help spur greater infrastructure PPP development in the region. So let me also take the opportunity to thank our wonderful team from Global Affairs Canada, Canadian Council for PPPs, and the GIF for their excellent work in organizing this event. So thank you again for attending today's sessions, and I look forward to reconvene virtually or hopefully in person sometime soon. Thank you all, and keep safe and stay healthy. Goodbye.
And goodbye from me in Grenada. I think this was a wonderful morning, and right now I think there's a beach with my name on it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone.